"Help me, brother," I whispered, as I stumbled to my brother's place in the dead of a freezing winter night. My clothes were tattered, and I cradled a baby in my arms. My brother's face went pale at the sight of me, frail, disheveled, clad only in a ragged shirt and barefoot. "What on earth happened?" he exclaimed, quickly ushering me inside and warming up the room. The baby, wrapped snugly in my jacket, slept soundly, but it couldn't stop shivering. "Who did this to you, my precious little sister?" my brother muttered through clenched teeth. "Lily, it's going to be okay now." Upon hearing his gentle voice, a wave of relief washed over me, and it felt as if all my strength had drained away. "My name is Lily. I'm a 27-year-old homemaker with a young son. I used to be a nurse, but I left my job when Terry, the son of the hospital director where I worked, proposed to me. I was drawn to Terry's kindness and his efficient work style. I have a brother, Derek, who is 5 years older than me. Our family consists of Derek and our grandparents since our parents died in a car accident when I was 4 and Derek was in 3rd grade. A truck driver, who had fallen asleep at the wheel, collided head-on with their car. My mother, a nurse, had been working late, and the accident happened when my father went to pick her up. Derek often recalls our father's last words before leaving that night. "Derek, I'm counting on you to take care of Lily." What might have been a casual request turned into a lifelong commitment for my brother. He has never let me down, always protecting me like a superhero. After the accident, it seemed we would be sent to separate foster homes, but our paternal grandparents, with whom we had little contact before, stepped in to take us. Our grandfather, with his white hair and long bushy beard, looked just like Santa Claus. When he first saw Derek, he muttered, "You're the spitting image of your father," and I believe I saw tears in his eyes. Our grandmother, a kind woman, hugged me tightly and sobbed, "Poor child." Later, I learned that our father had a falling out with our grandfather and left home, seeking freedom instead of continuing the family business. This led to a long estrangement, but our grandparents took us in despite the past. We moved to their home nestled in the rural mountains. Our grandfather, a renowned potter whose works fetched thousands of dollars, and our grandmother, whose kindness knew no bounds, raised us without financial difficulties. Under their care, Derek and I grew up happily. Derek went off to a prestigious university in the city, while I attended nursing school. We both pursued our dreams until our grandmother's health began to decline. Derek, who had been working in the city, returned home to help care for her. I wanted to return home too, but since I was still a student, Derek advised against it. Derek had always been interested in our grandfather's work, but our grandfather had firmly encouraged him to follow his own path, which led Derek to attend university. I believe our grandfather regretted forcing our father to continue the family business and didn't want his grandchildren to go through the same experience. However, Derek insisted on learning pottery from our grandfather. He had always been handy and pottery suited him well. Besides, Derek excelled in everything, academics, sports, and he was popular among his friends. He was truly a superhero. While taking care of our sick grandmother, Derek also learned the trade from our grandfather. After I graduated from nursing school, I started working as a nurse. It was then that Terry proposed to me and we got married. Our wedding was grand, and the joyous smiles of Derek and our grandfather are what I remember most. Derek brought pictures of our parents to the wedding. "We all just want you to be happy, Lily, including our late mom and dad," he said, shedding tears openly. Our grandmother, too ill to attend, cried tears of joy when she saw the video of the ceremony. I was truly blessed with a great family. I quit my job as a nurse, moved into Terry's family home, and began to support him as a full-time homemaker. We had a child, and my husband was kind. We were living a happy life. Until then, my life had seemed to be smooth sailing. I couldn't even imagine the hellish days that were to come. Not long after, my grandmother passed away. Terry attended the funeral with me and comforted me. My grandfather's disappointment was severe. I couldn't find the words to speak to him. While I was busy supporting our grandfather, my brother Derek delved deeper into his pottery. Half a year had passed when I found myself fleeing to Derek's place in the middle of a freezing winter night, wearing nothing but ragged clothes, holding a baby in my arms. As Derek beheld my drastically changed appearance, he was rendered speechless. I stood there, so thin and weak, clad only in a tattered shirt, barefoot. "What on earth happened?" he finally managed to say, ushering me inside and warming up the room. The baby, wrapped in my coat, slept soundly, but I couldn't shake off the shivers that racked my body. "Who did this to my dear sister?" Derek muttered through clenched teeth. A wave of relief washed over me upon hearing his voice, as if all strength had drained from my body. I didn't want to burden Derek or our grandfather, but I had no choice. I had to tell them. I began to recount the events at my in-laws' house. Terry and I had been living together, but due to my in-laws' insistence that I rest during and after pregnancy, we moved in with them. My in-laws, both remarried, welcomed us warmly. My father-in-law's kindness was particularly touching, as I had no father of my own. However, my mother-in-law seemed to harbor resentment. "You're flirting with my husband, aren't you, you disgusting woman?" she accused, launching into a campaign of verbal and physical abuse. She disparaged my upbringing, asserting that I could never blend in with their family's affluent background. As if that weren't enough, I found myself facing additional challenges due to a shortage of staff at the hospital. As a former nurse, I often found myself called in to assist at the hospital alongside my husband, Terry. However, during this time, I noticed something deeply unsettling. Terry, being the son of the hospital director, took it upon himself to reprimand the nurses in an unreasonable manner. "Move quicker, you're a nurse getting paid, aren't you? Don't slack off just because my father is lenient. Once I take over this hospital, I won't be so forgiving," he would bark at them. His harsh words towards the hardworking nurses were unreasonable and unjust. Attempting to intervene, I interjected, "Terry, don't you think that's too harsh? Everyone here is trying their best." Unfortunately, my husband didn't take kindly to my interference. In front of the other nurses, he flew into a rage, furious that I had dared to stand up to him. Since that incident, Terry became distant towards me, perhaps influenced by my mother-in-law, who had been insinuating from the start that I was too soft on your wife and that I was taking you for granted. Meanwhile, my father-in-law, though unable to openly oppose his wife, did what he could to protect me. Unfortunately, when my father-in-law fell seriously ill and became bedridden, the situation worsened. Seizing the opportunity, my mother-in-law made me take on all the household chores, treating me like a mere housekeeper. I found myself juggling caring for my son, cooking, laundry, and cleaning, all while enduring mistreatment. Even in front of my ailing father-in-law, my mother-in-law's cruelty knew no bounds. "Please don't speak to Lily that way," he would weakly protest, only to be met with her venomous retorts. Her abuse escalated, and I found myself being deprived of basic dignity. "Housekeepers don't eat with the family. Eat the leftovers later," she commanded, forcing me to subsist on scraps. Despite the hardships, I endured it all for the sake of my son and my ailing father-in-law. I was so distraught that I lost my appetite. When I glanced in the mirror, I was taken aback by the gaunt and worn reflection staring back at me. My husband's words cut deep. "I only married you because you were somewhat attractive, but I never imagined you become such a disheveled woman," he sneered, insisting that I relocate from our bedroom to the storage room. The cruelty was staggering. The verbal abuse didn't stop with me, it extended to our son. "Of course he's not smart. Look at who his mother is," my mother-in-law would scoff. "His constant crying is annoying. Make him stop right now," my husband demanded. It felt like something inside me had snapped. Determined to escape, my sole concern was my father-in-law's well-being. However, to my surprise, he urged me to flee to my brother's place. Pressing several $100 bills into my hand, he insisted I leave immediately. Without hesitation, I wrapped my son in my coat and hailed a taxi with the money my father-in-law had given me. I rushed to my grandfather's house, where I poured out the entire ordeal to him and my brother Derek. Derek, his usually calm demeanor replaced by a furious expression I had never seen before, clenched his fists in anger. Assuring me that things would be okay, he said, "You've been through so much. It's time to relax." Overwhelmed with emotion, I broke down in tears. Even my grandfather, typically reserved, muttered, "I can't forgive this." A few days later, leaving my son under my grandfather's care, I made the decision to return to my in-laws' house with Derek to retrieve my belongings. Having left abruptly without a word, I anticipated trouble upon our return. My husband greeted me with a cold gaze and muttered, "You finally returned, huh?" Derek, maintaining his composure, calmly stated, "My sister seems very distressed, so we'll be taking care of her for a while. We've come today to collect some of her personal belongings." To this, my husband retorted, "I married her, so if she doesn't come back, there will be no one to do the chores." That's a big problem for me. Looking down on Derek, my mother-in-law remarked, I heard you do pottery. It must be a tough life. Even if you take care of my daughter-in-law, it's going to be difficult for you, right? Please send her back. It's a problem for us too. I could see Derek struggling to contain his anger as we requested to retrieve our belongings. Directed to a storage room in the corner of the hallway, which served as my room, we found it cramped and neglected. Cardboard boxes and old appliances cluttered the space, with only a few changes of clothes for me and my son. There were no heating appliances, just a thin blanket and mattress. Derek, visibly shaken by the harsh conditions, confronted my mother-in-law. Is this where you've shoved my dear sister and her child? Her reply was callous. She should be grateful just to have a room. She's just a housekeeper after all. Eager to leave, yet concerned about my father-in-law, I wished to see him. He greeted me warmly and quietly handed me something, expressing his regret for not being able to protect me. For several days, we made preparations, and with my grandfather and Derek by my side, I returned to my in-laws' house. Determined to stand up for my son, I knew I couldn't keep running away forever. Upon arriving home, I handed my husband the divorce papers. His initial surprise quickly turned to defiance as he declared he wouldn't pay alimony or child support, claiming I had chosen to leave. To support my case, I played a recording in front of his mother, an audio documenting her belittling me and him shouting abuse. This is evidence of the abuse I suffered, I informed them. Their shock was palpable as they asked when I had even recorded this. It turned out my father-in-law had discreetly recorded everything to help me, passing the recording to me when I collected my belongings earlier. My brother Derek, who had graduated from law school and passed the bar exam while assisting our grandfather, assured me that I had grounds for divorce. He promised to fight for me wholeheartedly. As the tension escalated, my wheelchair-bound father-in-law appeared, handing divorce papers to my mother-in-law. He, too, had recorded the verbal abuse he endured and was now ready to divorce. Preferring life in a care facility over living with my mother-in-law, he asserted his decision firmly. My mother-in-law's reaction was unexpected. She laughed and declared her willingness to divorce as well, eager to return to her luxurious life. However, the situation took a dramatic turn when my grandfather made a call, announcing his termination of any contracts with a family like ours. It emerged that the major department store, run by my mother-in-law's brother, was on the brink of bankruptcy. He had been negotiating to exhibit and sell my grandfather's famous pottery, and the deal was close to finalization. However, a call from her brother, severing ties with her, left my mother-in-law stunned. Realizing the gravity of her situation, she began to plead for forgiveness, admitting her wrongdoing. At that moment, it became clear that change was inevitable. I have nowhere else to go. Please let me stay here, Lily. I'm sorry. Please forgive me, my mother-in-law pleaded tearfully. But forgiveness seemed out of reach for us. We all coldly stared at her, unmoved by her tears. Yet amidst the tension, my husband seemed oblivious to the gravity of the situation. I'm set to inherit this hospital. If you want a divorce, I'll pay alimony and child support. I'll marry someone younger and prettier than you, he said to me, his words laced with arrogance. However, my father-in-law interjected with a single sentence that changed everything. The hospital has been sold, he declared, his eyes widening in shock. What? My husband's face drained of color as my father-in-law revealed that Terry had been orchestrating behind the scenes. Get out of here right now, my father-in-law screamed at his stepson. My husband, not legally adopted by my father-in-law, had no claim to his assets. In contrast, I, legally adopted by my father-in-law, had been well cared for. Realizing the tide was turning against him, my husband quickly changed his tune, pleading for a fresh start with me, but I coldly dismissed him. Afterward, my son and I found solace and happiness at my grandparents' house. With each passing day, my son cried less, finding joy in playing outdoors. Meanwhile, the divorce proceedings were finalized, the audio tape proving crucial in establishing my mother-in-law's fault. They now live in a small rented apartment, their attempts at finding new jobs faltering. On the other hand, my grandfather enjoys comfort in a high-end senior home, where we visit him often. Terry continues his passion for pottery under my grandfather's guidance. Remarkably, my brother found love at a pottery exhibition, dating a woman with a passion for pottery. As for me, I work as a nurse at a hospital near my grandfather's house, fulfilling my dream inspired by my mother's legacy.
I'm Emily. I was a 25-year-old living a quiet, unremarkable existence with my boyfriend Mike in a relationship that had seen better days. We'd been together since college, a pair drawn together more by familiarity than by the fervent passion of star-crossed lovers. Our arguments were frequent, often about Mike's disinterest in planning for the future or his latest gaming marathon that would last well into the early hours, leaving me to sleep alone. We were two people dancing around the inevitable conversation of, "Where's this going?" without ever actually taking the floor. It's not that we didn't care for each other. It's just that somewhere along the line, we stopped trying to make it work. My parents, Sue and George, were the antithesis of us. Married for over 30 years, they still exchanged loving glances and shared private jokes, their bond seemingly unbreakable. They were my foundation, the steadfast love I aspired to find for myself, even if it wasn't going to be with Mike. On the evening of the crash, I remember arguing with Mike over something as trivial as unsorted laundry. He had promised to do it, and once again, the promise was as empty as the laundry basket was full. "Can't you just do one thing you say you're going to do?" I had asked, exasperation straining my voice. "It's just laundry, Em. It'll get done. Eventually," he had replied, his attention fixed on his computer screen. The argument had fizzled out as they usually did, with neither of us truly addressing the underlying issues. Later, as I sat in the back seat of my parents' car, the warmth of their chatter was a soothing balm to the residual frustration from the argument with Mike. They were celebrating another year of Mom's life, and their joy was infectious. Then, the world turned on its axis. Headlights merged with the sound of metal on metal, and everything went black. When I awoke, it was to the antiseptic smell of a hospital, the relentless beeping of the heart monitor, and a heavy blanket of dread. The doctor's words were clinical and detached, but the message was clear. My parents didn't make it, and my legs, my perfectly normal, taken-for-granted legs, might never carry me again. The truth settled like a stone in my stomach. I was suddenly, terrifyingly alone. Mike, the man I had just argued with about laundry, was now my only connection to a life before the crash. The life where my biggest worry was whether he'd sort the whites from the colors. As the reality of my parents' absence and my potential paralysis began to truly register, a hollow despair took root in me. The future, once a landscape of possibilities, now seemed like a barren field. The hospital room was a bubble where time moved both too quickly and not at all. After what seemed like an eternity of white walls and echoing silence, Mike walked in, his parents, Janet and Bob, a step behind him. The atmosphere was thick with a somberness that made my heart sink even lower, if that was possible. Mike pulled a chair up next to my bed and took my hand, his usual bravado absent. His parents stood by the door, a united front of awkward concern. "Hey, Em," Mike began, his voice a rough whisper. "I've been doing some thinking, a lot of thinking, actually." "Thinking?" I echoed, my voice dull. "About what?" "About us," he said, and his eyes met mine, filled with an emotion I couldn't quite place. All of this, it's made me see how short life can be. I wanted to say something, to ask what he meant, but the words seemed to stick in my throat. "I don't want to wait for the perfect moment anymore because it might never come," he continued, squeezing my hand. "What I'm trying to say is, will you marry me, Emily?" The question hung in the air, heavy and unexpected. It was the last thing I thought I'd hear, especially now. I searched his face for a sign of the impulsive Mike I knew, the one who acted first and thought later. But all I saw was earnestness. His mother, Janet, stepped forward, her hands clasped in front of her. "We want you to be a part of our family, Emily. We'll take care of you." "And it's not out of pity," Bob added quickly. "It's because we love you, and we want to support Mike in taking this step." I was stunned, my mind racing. This was a lifeline, unexpected, and maybe even a little reckless, but a lifeline nonetheless. I looked at Mike, really looked at him, and saw not just my sometimes immature boyfriend, but a man offering his support in the most uncertain time of my life. "Mike, My voice trailed off as I tried to gather my thoughts. "It's okay, Em. You don't have to decide right now. I just wanted you to know how I feel," he said, his thumb rubbing circles on the back of my hand. I thought about my parents, about the unwavering love and support they had always shown me. Wasn't this what they would have wanted? For me to be loved and cared for, no matter what? Mike, I don't know what the future holds for me, for us. But yes, I found myself saying, the words stronger than I felt. Yes, I'll marry you. A smile, the first genuine one I'd seen in days, spread across Mike's face. Janet let out a soft sob, covering her mouth with her hand, and even Bob's eyes glistened with unshed tears. Moving into my parents' house with Mike should have been a fresh start, a new chapter. The house was too big for just one person, and everywhere I looked, I saw memories of my parents. I thought having Mike with me would fill some of those empty spaces, but I was quickly learning that his presence was a reminder of what was missing, not a replacement. The first few days, he was attentive, always checking on me, making sure I had everything I needed within reach. But as days turned into weeks, the attentive husband act began to wear thin. Mike started spending more time on his computer, his headphones on, shutting me out. One evening, as I maneuvered my wheelchair into the kitchen, I found him staring blankly at his screen. "Mike, have you thought about looking for a new job?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light. "The insurance won't cover everything, and the bills are starting to pile up." He didn't look away from the screen. "I told you, Em, I'm taking care of you now. That's my job." "But I can take care of myself during the day," I pushed back, feeling a twinge of frustration. "You don't need to be here all the time." Finally, he turned to face me, his expression a mix of irritation and something else I couldn't quite read. "What do you want from me, Em? I'm here, aren't I?" I was taken aback by his tone. "Being physically here isn't the same as being present, Mike. I need a partner, not just a roommate." He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the tile. "You know what, Em? Maybe I need more than this too. Maybe I wasn't cut out to be a nursemaid." His words stung, and I watched him storm out, the door slamming behind him. I was left alone in the silence of the kitchen, the weight of his words settling around me like dust. I wasn't just alone, I was lonely. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I couldn't help but think about how quickly our modest honeymoon period had ended. The vows we had taken felt like they were from another lifetime. The Mike, who had lovingly promised to be by my side, in sickness and in health, seemed like a stranger now. As the weeks dragged on, his absences grew longer, and the excuses more flimsy. He was either out with friends or lost in a digital world that didn't seem to have room for me. I felt like an obstacle in his life, a burden he hadn't anticipated. One particularly tough day, when the pain was bad, and the house felt more like a mausoleum than a home, I heard the front door open. Expecting Mike, I called out, "Is that you?" "Yeah, it's me," he replied, his voice distant. "I'm just grabbing a few things, then I'm heading out again." I wheeled myself to the hallway, watching as he rifled through a drawer for his keys. "Going out with friends?" I asked, trying to mask the hurt in my voice. He paused, keys in hand, and sighed. "Em, I need some space, okay? It's not easy for me either, all this." I nodded, biting back tears. "I know. I just thought we could maybe spend some time together, like we used to." He shrugged, avoiding my eyes. "Maybe when things settle down a bit, I gotta go." The house felt emptier with each passing day, a vast space filled with silence and the ghost of better times. It wasn't just Mike's absence or the silence left in the wake of my parents' voices. It was the small things that started to go missing. A vase my mother loved, a silver frame holding a family photo, a painting that used to hang in the hallway. I first noticed it when I was trying to distract myself with memories. I wheeled myself into the living room, intent on looking through the photo albums. But as my eyes scanned the room, they fell on the bare patch of wall where the painting had been. Confusion knotted my brow. "Mike!" I called out, unsure when he had last gone out. There was no answer, and the emptiness of the house seemed to echo back at me. That evening, when Mike returned, I asked him, "Have you seen the landscape painting that used to be in the hallway?" He barely glanced up from his phone. "Oh, that old thing? Yeah, it was getting dusty, and I figured we could use the space for something else." Something about his casual dismissal didn't sit right with me. But it was my mom's favorite, I said, a tremor of unease in my voice. He shrugged, his attention still half on his screen. We can get another painting, Em. It's no big deal. But it was a big deal. The items that went missing next were unmistakable, things that had been in my family for years. One afternoon, I caught Janet, Mike's mom, in the act. She was bustling around the living room with a big black garbage bag. "Janet, what are you doing?" I asked, my voice sharp with alarm. She jumped, a guilty flush creeping up her neck. "Oh, just some spring cleaning, dear. This place is cluttered with so many old things." "But those are my things," I protested, my heart rate picking up. There, she cooed, her voice sickly sweet. "We're just making things nicer for you. You'll thank us later." I watched her like a hawk every time she visited after that, but the thefts became sneakier, more calculated. And every time I brought it up, I was met with reassurances that it was all in my best interest. One night, lying in bed, I turned to Mike, who was scrolling through his phone, as had become his nighttime ritual. "Mike, your parents have been taking things from the house. My things." He didn't look up. "Mom's just trying to help. You know she's got a knack for this stuff." "Help?" I echoed, disbelief coloring my tone. "By taking my parents' belongings?" He sighed, finally setting his phone down and turning to face me. "Look, Em, they think we should be looking forward, not backward. They're just trying to take some of the load off you." I wanted to scream, to rage against the violation, the disrespect. But I was tired of fighting, tired of questioning my own sanity. "This isn't what I want," I whispered, the fight draining out of me. Mike reached over and patted my hand, a gesture that felt more patronizing than comforting. "Try to get some sleep, Em. Things will look better in the morning." I couldn't take it anymore and confided in Anna, my closest friend who was also a massage therapist. She had been helping with my rehabilitation, her visits a rare source of relief. "Anna, things are going missing around the house," I confided as she worked on my stiff muscles. "And I can't shake the feeling that Mike and his parents are behind it." Anna paused, her hands stilling on my shoulders. "Have you talked to Mike about this?" "I have, but he just brushes it off. Says his parents are helping us by decluttering." I let out a hollow laugh. "But it's only my family's things that are disappearing." Anna's brows furrowed in concern. "That doesn't sound right, Em. Do you want me to do something? Maybe come by more often? Keep an eye out?" The idea sparked something in me, a plan forming from the embers of my frustration. "Could you, I don't know, maybe help me set up some sort of camera or something to record what's going on when I'm not in the room?" With a nod of determination, Anna agreed. "I'll bring something over tomorrow. We'll get to the bottom of this." True to her word, Anna came back the next day with some discreet recording devices, which she placed in strategic locations around the house. It felt like something out of a spy movie, and if I wasn't so desperate for the truth, I might have laughed at the absurdity of it all. A few days later, Anna returned with the recordings, and we sat down to listen. The voices of Mike and his parents filled the room, and the blood in my veins turned to ice as their scheme unfolded through their casual conversation. "And once we get her committed, the house and everything in it will be ours," Mike's voice said, clear and cold. "Yeah, the place will sell for a fortune, and all those antiques? Pure profit," his mother added, her tone greedy. "We just need to make sure Emily doesn't catch on before we have everything in place," his father chimed in. Tears streamed down my face as I listened to their betrayal. These people, who had promised to care for me, to be my family, were plotting against me. Anna reached over, her hand gripping mine tightly. "We have to do something, Em," she said, her voice laced with anger. I wiped my eyes, the sorrow quickly giving way to a steely resolve. "We will. I'm not going to let them get away with this." The morning after listening to the recordings, I tried to act normal, but every word they said, every smile they gave, felt like a lie. It was during breakfast when I noticed something was off. The usual noise of the city that drifted in through the open window was absent. I wheeled myself over to see what was happening, only to find that the ramps that allowed me access to the garden were gone. "Mike!" I called out, my voice laced with panic. "Where are the ramps?" He came into the room, feigning ignorance. The ramps? Oh, they were looking a bit worn. Thought they needed fixing. I stared at him, the man I thought I knew. And you didn't think to tell me? How am I supposed to get around? His gaze was evasive as he shrugged. I just thought you'd be safer inside for now. You know, until we get new ones. The room felt like it was spinning, and it wasn't from my injury. Safer? Or trapped? The words slipped out before I could stop them. He didn't respond, just turned and walked away, leaving me stewing in a mix of anger and helplessness. Later, when I asked Janet about it, she was syrupy sweet with false concern. We're just looking out for you, dear. We wouldn't want you to have an accident, she said, touching my shoulder with feigned tenderness. I pulled away from her touch, feeling the sting of their deceit. I didn't realize needing ramps qualified as a hazard, I replied, my voice steady though my insides were shaking. Janet's eyes hardened for a moment before she regained her composure. We're just trying to help, Emily. It's for the best. That night, as I lay in bed, the darkness felt oppressive. Mike was out again, probably drowning his guilt in cheap beer and cheaper thrills. I reached for my phone, the screen a small beacon in the dark, and dialed the number Anna had given me for emergencies. Anna, I whispered when she picked up, they've removed the ramps. I'm literally trapped in my own home. Her voice was firm, a lifeline in the tumultuous sea I was drowning in. Hang tight, Em. I'm going to make some calls. We're going to sort this out. Next day, I was in the kitchen when I heard the doorbell. My heart pounded as I maneuvered towards the entrance. It was Anna, flanked by a man and woman wearing crisp suits and stern expressions. They were from a local disability rights organization, here to assess my living situation. Beside them was my lawyer, Mr. Hammond, clutching a leather briefcase. Emily, we're here to make things right, Anna said, her determination matching the resolve in my chest. Mr. Hammond stepped forward. We need to establish the facts first, Emily. I'll need to see the house. Check against the inventory of your parents' belongings. As we moved through the house, the representatives from the service took notes, their disapproval clear at the missing ramps and the blatant disregard for my welfare. Mike walked in during the commotion, surprise etching his face. Em, what's going on? Who are these people? I looked at him, really looked at him, allowing the full weight of my gaze to settle on his shoulders. I'm taking back control, Mike. This is my lawyer, and these are advocates for people with disabilities. They're here to ensure my home is safe and that my rights are respected. Janet and Bob entered the fray, confusion turning to fear as they realized the seriousness of the situation. Emily, darling, what is this about? Janet's voice trembled. It's about my rights, my home, and the truth, I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. Mr. Hammond is here to confirm the inventory of my inheritance. Mr. Hammond opened his briefcase, pulling out documents and photographs. We have detailed records of all items bequeathed to Mrs. Harper. It seems several are missing. Bob's face paled. Now, Emily, I'm sure this is all just a misunderstanding. There's no misunderstanding, I replied, the recordings Anna had provided playing in my head. And I have more than just missing items to discuss. Mike's parents looked at each other, the facade of the caring in-laws crumbling before my eyes. Mike stood there, silent, the reality of the situation dawning on him. Anna moved closer to me. We also have evidence of the conversations you've had regarding Emily's property and well-being. The advocates from the Disability Service spoke up. Removing access to the ramps is a direct violation of Mrs. Harper's rights. We'll be taking action. As Mr. Hammond laid out the evidence of their theft and their plans for my future, I saw the trap I had been in from the outside. But now, the tables had turned. I was no longer the victim in their game. I was the one calling the shots. Mike finally found his voice. I can explain. But I shook my head. Save it, Mike. I've heard enough. Janet started to cry, and Bob put an arm around her, but there was no comfort to be found in their deceit. The day of the trial was a culmination of everything I had endured. The courtroom was stark, the air thick with tension. Mike and his parents were on one side, looking nothing like the family that had once promised to care for me. I was on the other, with Anna beside me and Mr. Hammond at the ready, with his briefcase of evidence. As the proceedings began, the judge looked down at us from his bench, his gaze lingering on me for a moment. "We are here to examine the evidence regarding the allegations of theft and the premeditated exploitation of Emily Harper," he said. Mr. Hammond presented the recordings, the inventory discrepancies, and testimonies from the disability advocates. The evidence was damning, and Mike's family could do little but squirm under the weight of their own deceit. Janet sobbed quietly, her sobs a soundtrack to the unraveling of their scheme. "We never meant for things to go this far," she whispered, when it was her turn to speak. The judge's voice was firm as he addressed them. "You took advantage of a vulnerable person. There's no excuse for your actions." Mike stood, his voice barely audible. "I'm sorry, Em. I never wanted to hurt you." I looked at him, the history we shared playing out in a flash before my eyes. "Sorry isn't enough, Mike. You chose this path." The gavel came down like the final word on the life I had once known. Mike and his parents were found guilty. Reparations were ordered, and they were to have no further contact with me. With the help of Anna and a dedicated team, I started physical therapy. Each small movement was a victory, each step a testament to my resilience. My legs, once lifeless, began to tingle with new strength. One day, as I managed to stand with the help of parallel bars, Anna cheered me on. "Look at you, Em, you're doing it!" The smile on my face was mirrored in her own. "I am, aren't I?" The joy bubbled up from a place I thought had been broken beyond repair. And so I moved forward, one day at a time. The house, once a mausoleum of my past life, was slowly transformed back into a home, a sanctuary where I healed and grew stronger. My name is Eliza, and I thought I had it all figured out. At 30, I was married to the love of my life, Michael, and we lived in this cozy, though tiny apartment in one of the city's most sought-after areas. This place, with its quaint charm and memories, was a gift from my late grandmother. Michael and I were like two peas in a pod. He worked in finance, always dressed in those sharp suits that made him look so handsome. I worked in marketing, a job I loved for its creativity and pace. We were the perfect team, or so I thought. One lazy Sunday morning, as we were having breakfast, Michael brought up the topic of family, a conversation we had danced around for a while. "Eliza, I've been thinking," Michael began, his eyes serious, "about us, about starting a family." I felt a flutter in my heart. "Really? That's great. I've always dreamed of a big family," I replied, my voice filled with excitement. Michael smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I want that too, but let's wait until we have a bigger place. This apartment is too small for a family." I nodded, though a part of me felt a bit disappointed. "You're right. It makes sense. We should sell this place first, right?" "Exactly," he said, reaching over to squeeze my hand. "Once we sell your grandmother's apartment, we can buy a house big enough for, say, 3 or 4 kids." I laughed. 4 kids? That's a mini army." The conversation shifted to lighter topics after that, but I couldn't shake off a feeling of unease. It was like a small cloud on a sunny day. Family gatherings were a big thing in Michael's family. His parents, Robert and Martha, were the warmest people you'd ever meet. They welcomed me into their family with open arms. Then there was Alex, Michael's younger brother, who was married to Sarah. They had 2 adorable kids, but Sarah and I never clicked. She was always a bit cold and distant, and sometimes downright rude. During one such family gathering at Michael's parents' house, she made a snide remark about my cooking. "Eliza, maybe you should stick to marketing and leave the cooking to us homemakers," she said, a fake smile plastered on her face. I remember feeling my cheeks burn with embarrassment. Michael jumped in, trying to lighten the mood. "Hey, I love Eliza's cooking, right, Dad?" he said, looking at his father, who nodded in agreement. The evening passed with more awkward moments, but I tried to brush them off. I loved Michael, and I was determined to make things work, even with Sarah. As we lay in bed that night, I turned to Michael. "Do you think Sarah doesn't like me?" Michael, already half asleep, murmured, "Don't worry about her. You're amazing, and that's all that matters." I wanted to believe him, I really did. But deep down, I knew that things were not as perfect as they seemed. And little did I know, my world was about to turn upside down. A few weeks had passed since that conversation with Michael about starting a family. The idea of waiting for a bigger home had settled in my mind, though I still held on to the dream of a large family. It was a chilly December morning, and I was tidying up the apartment while Michael was at work. I decided to clean out the coat closet. It was overflowing with jackets and coats we hardly wore. As I was going through Michael's coats, I felt something in the pocket of his winter jacket. Curious, I pulled it out. It was a receipt. At first, I thought it was just another receipt for coffee or something mundane, but this was different. It was a receipt for a scarlet-colored designer bag from a high-end store known for its romantic gifts. My heart skipped a beat. Could this be for me? I wondered aloud, a smile spreading across my face. Michael had never been the type to splurge on extravagant gifts, but maybe this was his way of showing his love, especially with Christmas just around the corner. That evening, when Michael came home, I decided not to mention the receipt. I wanted to act surprised when he gave me the gift. We sat down for dinner, and I couldn't help but feel a bit giddy. "Michael, what are we doing for Christmas?" I asked casually. He looked up from his plate. "Oh, the usual. Dinner at my parents'. Why, you got something special in mind?" I shook my head. No, just the usual sounds perfect. The days leading up to Christmas were busy with work and preparations for the holidays. But that receipt stayed in the back of my mind. I imagined how that scarlet bag would look with my New Year's outfit. Finally, it was Christmas Eve. We were at Michael's parents' house, the whole family buzzing with festive cheer. Presents were piled under the tree, and I kept sneaking glances at them, trying to spot a bag-shaped gift. "Eliza, can you help me with the dessert?" Martha, Michael's mom, called out from the kitchen. "Of course, Martha. Be right there," I replied, happy to lend a hand. As I helped her with the pie, I mentioned the gift. "Michael's been acting a bit secretive. I think he's planning a surprise for me." Martha smiled. "That boy always has something up his sleeve. You're good for him, Eliza." The time came to open the gifts. My heart raced as Michael handed me a medium-sized, neatly wrapped box. It didn't feel like a bag, but maybe. I tore open the wrapping paper to find a set of beautiful porcelain dishes. I looked up at Michael, confused. "Surprise! I know you've been wanting a new set for when we host dinners," he said, smiling. I forced a smile. "They're lovely, Michael. Thank you." But inside, I felt a wave of disappointment wash over me. Where was the scarlet bag? Why did he buy it if not for me? The Christmas dinner at Michael's parents' house was in full swing. The house was filled with laughter, the clinking of glasses, and the warm glow of holiday lights. I tried my best to push the thoughts of the scarlet bag out of my mind and focus on the festivities. "Eliza, could you pass the gravy?" Alex, Michael's brother, asked from across the table. "Sure, here you go," I replied, passing the gravy boat down the table. Michael's parents were beaming, happy to have their family around them. His mother, Martha, always went all out for Christmas, and this year was no exception. The dinner was delicious, and everyone seemed to be enjoying themselves. After dinner, we all moved to the living room for the gift exchange. I watched as Michael's nieces tore open their presents with glee, their faces lighting up with each new toy they uncovered. It wasn't until we were getting ready to leave that I noticed something that made my heart stop. There, slung over Sarah's shoulder, was a striking scarlet-colored designer handbag. It was unmistakable, the very same bag from the receipt I had found in Michael's coat. My mind raced as we said our goodbyes. I couldn't take my eyes off that bag. It was more than just a purse. It was a symbol of something hidden, something unspoken. On the drive home, the car was filled with an uneasy silence. Michael seemed oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. As the city lights passed by, my mind replayed the evening, but this time I saw it through a different lens. I remembered the fleeting glances that Michael and Sarah had exchanged throughout the night. They were subtle, almost imperceptible, but now they seemed glaringly obvious. The way their eyes met across the room, the brief smiles, the quick, hushed conversations when they thought no one was looking. "Is everything okay, Eliza? You've been awfully quiet." Michael's voice broke through my thoughts. I turned to look at him, 1,000 questions on the tip of my tongue. But I couldn't bring myself to voice any of them, not yet. "I'm just a bit tired, that's all," I managed to say, my voice barely a whisper. The rest of the drive home was spent in silence, each lost in our own thoughts. As we lay in bed that night, I couldn't help but feel a sense of betrayal creeping in. The man I loved, the life we had built together, suddenly everything seemed like a fragile facade, ready to crumble at any moment. In the days that followed Christmas, my mind was in turmoil, haunted by the sight of Sarah with that scarlet designer handbag and the subtle glances exchanged between her and my husband, Michael. The nagging feeling in my gut told me something wasn't right. One cold evening, as Michael sat idly flipping through TV channels, I decided to confront him. "Michael, can we talk? It's about the bag," I said, my voice betraying a hint of nervousness. He looked at me with a casual expression. "What about it? I just helped Alex pick out a surprise for her, that's all." I took a deep breath. "I found the receipt, Michael. It was in your coat. Why didn't you tell me?" He let out a small laugh, trying to wave it off. "Oh, that. It was just a favor for Alex. You're thinking too much into it, Eliza." His response did little to soothe my suspicions. Later that night, as Michael lay asleep, I mustered up the courage to look through his phone. My heart pounded as I scrolled through his messages and stumbled upon a thread that would change everything. The conversation between Michael and Sarah was not just flirty. It was intimate, revealing a deep and long-standing affair. But the true shock came when I read a message where they discussed the biggest secret of all. Alex's children were actually Michael's. The revelation hit me like a ton of bricks. My husband had been in a relationship with his brother's wife, and the children I'd come to adore as my nephews were in fact my stepchildren. I felt sick to my stomach as I read message after message. They spoke of love, of a future together, and, most shockingly, of convincing me to sell the apartment and move the money to a joint account. Tears streamed down my face as the magnitude of the betrayal sank in. I was quick to screenshot the messages, sending them to my email for safekeeping. With a heavy heart, I deleted any trace of my actions from his phone and lay back, my mind spinning with the enormity of the deception. The next morning, I played the part of the unsuspecting wife. Over breakfast, Michael brought up selling our apartment, a conversation we'd had previously. "So, what do you think about the sale? It could be a good move for us." I nodded, my mind racing with plans of my own. "Yes, let's sell it. It's time for a new beginning," I replied, my voice steady despite the chaos within. He smiled, unaware of the storm brewing inside me. That's my girl, always so decisive. Little did he know, I was thinking about my future, but it was a future that was starting to look very different from the one we had planned together. Armed with the bitter truth about Michael's affair and the shock of his betrayal, I knew I needed to act smartly and swiftly. I put on a mask of normalcy in front of Michael while planning my next steps. A few days later, I made an appointment with a lawyer, Mrs. Jenkins, a recommendation from a close friend. Sitting in her office, I felt a mix of nervousness and determination. "Mrs. Jenkins, I have proof of my husband's infidelity, and it's not just any affair. He's been involved with his brother's wife, and their children are actually his," I explained, my voice trembling slightly. Mrs. Jenkins listened intently, her expression serious. "I'm sorry you're going through this, Eliza. Let's go over the evidence you have. We need to plan your next steps carefully." I showed her the screenshots of the messages between Michael and Sarah. She took notes, nodding her head thoughtfully. "This is quite damning evidence. We can use this in your favor, especially in terms of the financial settlement," Mrs. Jenkins said. "However, I advise discretion until we have everything in place. Are you prepared to go through with a divorce?" "Yes, I am. I can't be with someone who's betrayed me like this," I replied, a sense of resolve building within me. Mrs. Jenkins outlined a plan. First, we'd secure my financial assets, especially the money from the apartment sale. Then, we'd proceed with filing for divorce, using the evidence to negotiate a favorable settlement. As I left her office, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. There was a long road ahead, but I was ready to take it. Back at home, I continued to act as if everything was normal. Michael, oblivious to my discovery and the impending storm, was focused on the apartment sale. So, I talked to a real estate agent today. He said we could get a good price for the apartment, Michael said one evening over dinner. That's great news, I replied, keeping my emotions in check. Do you think it's a good time to put it on the market? Absolutely. The sooner we sell, the sooner we can start looking for a new place, he said, unaware of the irony in his words. As the days passed, I worked closely with Mrs. Jenkins, preparing all the necessary documents and securing my financial position. Every conversation with Michael, every smile, was a performance. But it was a performance I needed to maintain a little longer until everything was ready. The day we listed the apartment for sale, Michael was ecstatic. This is it, Eliza, our new beginning. Little did he know, it was indeed the beginning of something new, but not the future he envisioned. My heart ached with the pain of betrayal, but I was determined to come out of this stronger. The plot I was weaving wasn't just for retribution, it was for my independence and a fresh start. As the new year approached, the plans I had been carefully laying with Mrs. Jenkins were coming together. My facade of normalcy with Michael remained intact, even as my heart grew heavier each day. The final act of my plan was set to unfold during the New Year's Eve party at Michael's parents' house. It was there that I would reveal everything. The evening of the party arrived, and the house was buzzing with the usual festive cheer. Michael's parents had outdone themselves with decorations, and the air was filled with laughter and the clinking of glasses. I mingled with the family, all the while feeling like I was in the eye of a storm. Michael was in high spirits, completely unaware of what was about to happen. Eliza, you seem a bit quiet tonight. Everything okay? Michael asked as we found a moment alone in the kitchen. Just thinking about the new year and all the changes it'll bring, I said, my voice steady. He smiled and wrapped his arm around me. It's going to be our best year yet. If only he knew. As midnight approached, everyone gathered around with glasses in hand, ready to count down to the new year. I took a deep breath, knowing that my moment was near. As the clock struck 12 and everyone cheered, I turned to Michael. Before we celebrate too much, I have a special gift for you, I said, my voice loud enough for everyone to hear. I handed him a small, neatly wrapped box. The room quieted as all eyes turned to us. Michael, looking surprised, unwrapped the box. Inside were the divorce papers and a printout of the messages I had found on his phone. His face drained of color as he realized what they were. "What is this, Eliza?" he stammered, his voice barely a whisper. "It's over, Michael. I know about you and Sarah. I know about everything," I said, my voice clear and strong. The room erupted into chaos. Michael's parents looked shocked. His brother Alex was speechless, and Sarah, who had been standing near the back, looked like she might faint. "What are you talking about, Eliza?" Michael's mother asked, confusion and concern in her voice. "Michael has been having an affair with Sarah, and her children are his," I said, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. Michael tried to speak, but no words came out. Sarah started crying, and Alex, who had been silent up until now, turned to his brother. "Is this true, Michael? Tell me this isn't true." Alex's voice was filled with a mix of anger and disbelief. Michael couldn't meet his brother's eyes. The truth was out there for everyone to see, and there was no escaping it. The revelation at the New Year's Eve party sent shockwaves through the room. Michael's family, once a picture of unity and joy, was now a scene of chaos and disbelief. The truth about Michael's affair with Sarah and their plan to embezzle the money from my apartment sale was out, and the reactions were immediate and intense. Michael's mother, Martha, looked at him with a mix of disbelief and heartbreak. "Michael, how could you? And with Sarah? To think you were planning to steal from Eliza and run away?" Before Michael could respond, I added, "And it's not just the affair. They were planning to use the money from the sale of my apartment to leave the country." The room went silent. The gravity of the betrayal hung heavy in the air. Then, Martha, overcome with emotion, fainted, causing a stir as family members rushed to her side. Michael stood there, looking lost and defeated. His father, Robert, shook his head in disgust. "I can't believe you would do this to your own family, to your own brother." Alex, who had been silent, his face a mask of shock and hurt, finally spoke. "Michael, I don't even know who you are anymore." Sarah was sobbing uncontrollably, her tears doing little to garner any sympathy. The family was too stunned and hurt by the depth of their deceit. With Martha being attended to and the room in disarray, I knew this was my moment to make my stand. I raised my voice, ensuring everyone heard me clearly. "I am filing for divorce from Michael, and I won't just stop there. I will be seeking financial compensation for this betrayal from both Michael and Sarah." The words felt empowering to say out loud. It was a declaration of my independence and my refusal to be a victim of their selfishness. Michael tried to approach me, a look of desperation in his eyes. "Eliza, please, let me explain." I held up my hand to stop him. "There's nothing you can say to justify what you've done. You and Sarah have made your choices. Now, you'll have to live with the consequences." The months following the New Year's Eve revelation were a whirlwind. The divorce proceedings were tough, but with each passing day, I felt a sense of liberation growing within me. I was no longer bound to a relationship built on lies and deceit. One sunny afternoon, after finalizing the last of the divorce papers, I sat in a cafe, a cup of coffee in hand, reflecting on the journey I had been through. "You look like you're a million miles away," my friend Clara said as she joined me at the table. "Just thinking about everything that's happened," I replied, offering a small smile. "You've handled it all with such grace, Eliza. I'm proud of you," she said, her eyes full of genuine sympathy. "Thanks, Clara. It wasn't easy, but I feel like I can finally start fresh now," I said, feeling the weight of the past months lift off my shoulders. With the divorce settled, I had kept the apartment and received a significant financial settlement from Michael. As for him, his reputation had taken a severe hit, and he lost his job due to the scandal. Sarah and Alex had also gone their separate ways, with the family ties deeply strained. "I heard Michael moved out of the city," Clara mentioned, stirring her coffee. "Yes, he did. And honestly, I'm relieved. It's easier to move on knowing he's not around," I admitted. "And what's next for Eliza?" Clara asked, a hint of excitement in her voice. I thought for a moment. "I want to focus on myself for a while. Maybe travel, pick up some hobbies that I've been neglecting, and who knows, perhaps even start dating again when I'm ready." "That sounds wonderful. You deserve all the happiness in the world," she said, reaching over to squeeze my hand. As we chatted and laughed, I felt a sense of hope for the future. The pain of the past was still there, a faint scar on my heart, but it no longer defined me. I had emerged stronger and more self-assured. The story of my marriage and its dramatic end would always be a part of me, but it was now just that, a part of my past. Ahead of me lay a path filled with new possibilities and opportunities for growth and happiness. It was the end of one chapter, but the beginning of something new, something entirely my own. A fresh start, a new beginning, and a life that I was ready to embrace fully. My name is Elaine, and at 55, I find myself in the sterile quietude of a hospital room, the IV drip a constant reminder of the battle I'm facing, cancer. The cold touch of the sheets is a stark contrast to the warmth I used to feel at home, now a distant memory. 15 years have lapsed since I walked down the aisle to George, a widower with a bright-eyed daughter, Mia. She was 10, all pigtails and toothy smiles, eagerly accepting me not just as her father's wife, but as a mother in spirit. She became the daughter I never had, the unexpected joy in a marriage I thought would fill the pages of my life with love and companionship. George was a man of stature, a businessman whose allure was as much about his charisma as it was the way he seemed ready to build a new life with me. But time has a way of eroding facades, and his once tender patience gave way to relentless demands. I'd trudge home from my job as a financial analyst, a role that demanded precision and left little room for error, only to find a second shift awaiting me. A test of my domestic diligence I was bound to fail in his eyes. I remember his exacting standards, the way he'd scrutinize the dinner table. "Elaine, is this the best you could do?" he'd ask, barely looking at the carefully prepared dishes before him. His words were like weights, each one piling on until I felt I could barely stand. Yet I continued to cook, clean, and care for him, even when my body screamed for rest. My parents, God bless them, would often tell me, "Elaine, You need to take care of yourself too. But their advice would fall on deaf ears. I was too caught up in the cycle of appeasement. It's during one of these silent meals that my cell phone vibrates, startling me from my thoughts. It's Mia. Her voice is a balm to my tired spirit. "Mom, how are you holding up?" I try to sound stronger than I feel. "I'm hanging in there, sweetie. How are you?" She's silent for a beat too long, and I know she's carrying a weight too heavy for her young shoulders. "I'm worried about you, Mom. Dad, he doesn't seem to care." Her words are a punch to the gut, but not unexpected. George's absence in these sterile white walls has been as loud as the blips on the monitors beside me. "Mia, love, I know. It's okay. We have each other," I say, the words tasting like a mix of sadness and resolve. There's a pause, and then her voice, laced with a quiet strength, comes through. "We do, and I'm here, every step of the way. Don't worry about Dad. Worry about getting better." Her reassurance is the anchor I didn't know I needed. When she visits, we don't talk about George, or the cold dinners, or the way his eyes no longer held any warmth for me. Instead, we talk about her job, the books she's reading, the life she's building. Her resilience and independence make me proud, and I cling to the fact that I played some part in shaping the incredible woman she's become. I lie back, closing my eyes as Mia's promises echo in my mind. The hospital room feels less confining somehow, as if her words have breathed life into its corners. I am not alone, and that's a thought worth holding on to. The day starts before the sun peeks over the horizon, my alarm clock a relentless foe. I'm up, pulling on the clothes I laid out the night before, my movements as automatic as the coffee maker that sputters to life in the kitchen. George is still asleep, the rise and fall of his chest the only evidence of life. At work, the numbers and spreadsheets are a welcome distraction. They don't complain, they don't demand, they just exist in their black and white cells, waiting for me to make sense of them. My colleagues are another story, buzzing around with office gossip and weekend plans. "Elaine, you've got to come out with us one of these Fridays," Janet from accounting says, popping her head into my cubicle. I manage a smile, though I can't remember the last time I had plans that didn't involve George or a grocery list. "Thanks, Janet. Maybe next time." She gives me a sympathetic pat on the shoulder before buzzing off to her next conversation. Home again, the routine continues. I'm chopping vegetables for the stew George likes when he walks in, early from work. His mood's a toss-up. I brace myself for whatever version of him is coming through the door. "Smells good," he says, which feels like a small victory. I let out the breath I've been holding. "It should be ready in about an hour," I respond, keeping my tone even. He grunts, disappearing into the living room. The TV comes to life, and I'm left alone in the kitchen with the carrots and potatoes. I find comfort in the rhythm of my knife against the cutting board, a simple, predictable sound. Later, we sit across from each other at the dining table, a chasm of unsaid words between us. He's scrolling through his phone, barely acknowledging the meal. "It's good," he mumbles after a few minutes, but there's a distance in his voice that's become all too familiar. I nod, my own phone lighting up with a text from Mia. "Thinking of you, Mom. Hope dinner went well." I type back a quick, "Love you," and slip the phone back into my pocket. George looks up, eyes narrowing. "Was that Mia?" "Yeah, just checking in," I say, trying to keep the conversation light. He nods, going back to his phone, and we finish dinner in silence. I clean up, the clinking of dishes filling the empty air. Tomorrow will be the same, the grind wearing away like waves on a cliffside, constant and relentless. But tonight, Mia's message is a lifeline, a reminder that not everything is as cold and unforgiving as this routine. There's warmth there, love, and it's enough to keep me going for one more day. The hospital room's constant beeps and murmurs are background noise as I'm lost in thought. It's during one of these quiet moments that Mia walks in, her face etched with worry. I can tell she's bearing a weight, the kind that's ready to topple over. She pulls a chair close to my bed, takes my hand, and sighs deeply. "Mom, there's something you should know," she begins, her voice a mix of anger and sorrow. I squeeze her hand, encouraging her to continue. "What is it, Mia?" "It's about Dad," she pauses, gathering her thoughts. He has someone else. The words hang heavily between us. I had felt the presence of someone in our lives, an invisible intruder, but hearing it confirmed sends a chill through me. He introduced her to me, Mom, Mia's voice cracks, as his future wife. The air feels thick, like I'm breathing through cotton. I try to absorb the shock, to maintain some sense of composure for Mia's sake, but inside, I'm reeling. When? The word comes out as a whisper. Last week. He told me he was serious about her, Mia replies, her eyes not leaving mine, a silent apology in her gaze. There's a long pause as I process this betrayal. Thank you for telling me, sweetheart, I manage to say at last. How long have you known? Just a few days, she admits. I didn't want to upset you, but I thought it's better you hear it from me. The dull hum of the hospital seems to fade into silence. I'm grateful for her honesty, yet the pain is sharp, unyielding. I nod, feeling an odd sense of calm amidst the turmoil. We'll deal with this, I say, more to convince myself than to reassure her. Mia leans forward, resting her forehead against our clasped hands. I'm here for you, Mom, whatever you need. I draw a deep breath, my mind already turning. My husband's betrayal is a deep cut, but I won't let it be the end of my story. There's a plan forming, a way out of the mess he's made. And in this sterile hospital room, with my stepdaughter by my side, I feel the first stirrings of a future where I am no longer in the shadows of a loveless marriage. I will rise from this, with a cunning that's been honed by years of quiet observation. George may have underestimated me, but he'll soon learn that's his mistake. I look at Mia, her strength becoming my own. Let's start planning, I say, and there's a new determination in my voice. Our bond, unbroken by the lies that surround us, is the foundation we'll build upon. And as Mia smiles, a small, fierce smile, I know we'll win this battle together. The next day, Mia arrives with her laptop tucked under her arm and a look in her eyes that says she means business. She pulls up a chair next to my hospital bed, opens her laptop, and looks straight at me. Okay, Mom, let's talk strategy, she says with a determined nod. I can't help but smile at her spirit. I've been thinking about that, I admit. I want to be fair, but also, I want to protect myself and my future, and yours. Mia nods, her fingers poised over the keyboard. First things first, we should get a lawyer, someone who can help us navigate the divorce smoothly. I agree. Yes, a lawyer, and we'll need to gather all the financial documents. I've got most of them at home in the safe. We can go through them together, Mia offers. What about the house and the rest of the assets? I've been doing some math, I start, feeling the edge of the bed with my fingers. The house. I think I'll let him have it. Mia frowns, surprised. Really? Are you sure? I nod firmly. I want a fresh start, somewhere new, without the memories. Plus, I've got something he doesn't know about. Her eyebrows raise in curiosity. What's that? The investment account, I say. The one my father helped me set up. It's in his name, technically, but it's mine. There's quite a bit of money there, enough for a new place and a comfortable life. Mia's eyes widen. He doesn't know about that? No, and he won't, I state. That money was from before we married. It's separate, and I want to keep it that way. Mia types away, probably making notes. Got it. We keep that account quiet. We should also think about alimony or any spousal support. I shake my head. I don't want his money, but I won't say no if it's offered. It could be useful. Okay, Mia says. And after the legal stuff is sorted? That's when I start my new life, I say, looking out the window. I want to travel, see places I've always dreamed of. When I'm well, of course. Mia reaches out and squeezes my hand. You'll get well, Mom, and I'll be right there with you wherever you go. I squeeze back, feeling a surge of gratitude for this girl. No, this woman, who's been my rock. We're in this together, I tell her, and it's more than just about the plan. It's about us, our journey ahead, and the unspoken understanding that we're a team now. The afternoon sun casts long shadows across my bed as we continue to plot, not just for the end of my marriage, but for the beginning of something new. Just the two of us, ready to face whatever comes next. A few days had passed since Mia and I had put together a plan. Lying on my hospital bed, I felt a mixture of anticipation and anxiety about setting our plan into motion. Mia walked into the room, her face flushed from the cold outside. "All right, it's time," she said, sitting down beside me. "Are you sure you're up for this, Mom?" I nodded, the IV in my arm a stark reminder of my current weakness, but my resolve was strong. "I'm sure, it's now or never." Mia took out her phone, her thumb hovering over the screen. "I'm about to text Dad. I'll tell him that you want to discuss the divorce and that you're willing to talk settlement." "That'll get his attention," I murmured, the bitterness in my voice belying my calm exterior. Mia sent the text, and we waited. It didn't take long for her phone to buzz. She read the message and looked up at me. "He's biting. Wants to come over tomorrow to talk terms." I couldn't help the wry chuckle that escaped my lips. "Talk terms, huh? All right. When he comes, let him believe he's in control. That's the bait." Mia frowned slightly, her concern for me clear. "And you're okay with this? With him coming here and acting like he's won?" I reached for her hand, my grip firmer than it had been in days. "It's just an act, Mia. Remember that. We're letting him think he's won because it's the only way to get what we need from him." Mia squeezed my hand back, her own determination returning to her eyes. "Okay, Mom. I trust you." "And," I added, "make sure he sees the safe when he comes. It's empty, but he doesn't know that. If he thinks there's something valuable in there, it'll keep him focused on the wrong thing." She nodded, making a mental note. "Got it. And after he leaves?" "We proceed with the divorce as planned. But remember, whatever happens, don't let on about the money. That's our ace." Mia stood up, her phone in her pocket. "I won't. We'll get through this, just like you said, together." As she walked out, I lay back against my pillow, closing my eyes. This was just the beginning, but I had to believe that it would lead to an end. Our end, one where Mia and I could move forward, free from the shadows of deceit that had loomed over us for far too long. The morning light crept through the blinds, casting lines across the hospital room floor. I had barely slept, thoughts whirling about the upcoming confrontation. I tried to steady my breathing, the rhythmic beeping of the monitor beside my bed, a constant reminder of my situation. There was a knock on the door, and Mia peeked in, her face serious. "He's here, Mom." I nodded, sitting up a little straighter. "Let him in." Mia opened the door, and in walked George, my soon-to-be ex-husband. He had a smirk on his face that made my stomach turn, but I kept my expression neutral. "Hello, George," I said, my voice steady. "Didn't expect to see you looking so alive," he sneered, taking a seat without being offered one. "So, what's this about a settlement?" I took a deep breath. "I want to keep things simple. No dragging this out. You can have the house." His smirk widened. "That's generous of you. What's the catch?" "No catch," I replied, meeting his gaze. "I just want to end this cleanly. I'm tired, George. I don't have the energy for a fight." Mia watched, her face a mask of control. George's eyes flicked to her and then to the safe in the corner of the room. "I suppose you'll be wanting support then?" he asked, a greedy glint in his eyes. I shook my head slightly. "No, I don't want your money. I'll manage on my own." He leaned back, looking suspicious. "What's your game here? You're giving up everything. What are you hiding?" "Nothing to hide," I said, allowing a hint of fatigue to seep into my voice. "I just want peace, George, and I think you do too." He snorted. "Yeah, peace, with a young, beautiful woman waiting for me." Mia's hand clenched into a fist, but she didn't speak. "I hope she makes you happy," I said quietly. George stood up, looking around the room once more. "Fine. I'll have my lawyer call yours. We'll get this over with." As he reached the door, he paused and looked back at me. "You're a fool, you know that? Letting go of everything without a fight." I met his gaze, my own eyes clear. "Maybe, but sometimes, letting go is the only way to move forward." George shook his head and left, the door closing with a soft click behind him. Mia rushed to my side. "Are you okay, Mom?" I nodded, feeling a weight lifting off my shoulders. "I'm fine, it's done. Now we just have to follow through." Mia hugged me, her presence a comfort. "You're the bravest person I know." I hugged her back, allowing myself this moment of warmth. Brave? Maybe. But I'm not in this alone, am I? "No, Mom," Mia whispered. "Not alone, never alone." The ink on the divorce papers wasn't even dry when Mia dropped the bomb about the money. She was hesitant at first, biting her lip in that way she does when she's nervous. But I urged her on, knowing that whatever came next was just another scene in this absurd play my life had become. "Dad knows about the $3 million, Mom," Mia said, her voice barely above a whisper. I sighed, not surprised. I expected as much. What's his play? It didn't take long for him to make his move. The next day, he was at my hospital room door, his eyes wide with a mix of greed and desperation. He knelt by my bed, taking my hand in his. "I've been a fool," he started, his voice trembling with feigned emotion. "Please, let's put all this behind us and start over." I looked at him, really looked at him, and I felt nothing. It was liberating. I couldn't help but laugh, a genuine, deep laugh that I hadn't felt in years. "Start over?" I said, pulling my hand away. "There's nothing to start, George. It's done." His face turned an ugly shade of red, the mask slipping. "You think you can mock me?" he hissed. "I'll take you to court. I'll take every penny of that money." "That money," I said calmly, almost enjoying this, "is safely out of your reach. It's in my father's name. There's not a thing you can do about it." His eyes bulged and he spluttered, his anger a living thing between us. But before he could form words, security was at the door, alerted by the commotion. They didn't even need to speak. Their presence was enough. George's outburst was his final act, his curtain call. As they escorted him out, his shouts echoed down the hall, a pitiful sound that faded with each step. I leaned back against my pillows, a sense of peace settling over me. Mia, who had stood by the door, her face a mix of worry and anger, finally let out a long breath. "Are you okay, Mom?" I reached for her hand, a smile playing on my lips. "I am now, sweetheart. It's truly over." We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the past lifting, leaving room for something new, something better. And as the door closed on the last vestige of my old life, I felt ready to face a new day. It was a clean slate, a true new beginning, and I was ready to write my own story. Life after cancer, and George felt like stepping out of a long, dark tunnel into sunlight. I bought a house with a big garden, somewhere Mia could visit whenever she wanted, a place that felt like ours, truly ours. One afternoon, Mia and I were sitting on the porch, sipping lemonade and watching the sun dip below the trees. She had been helping me unpack boxes, turning the house into a home. Her laughter was a frequent sound here, echoing off the walls, filling spaces that had known too much silence. "You know, Mom," Mia said, her eyes scanning the yard, "I've never seen you this relaxed." I smiled, feeling the warmth of the sun on my face. "I have a lot to be thankful for. I beat cancer, I'm free of George, and I have you." She squeezed my hand. "I'm just glad you're finally putting yourself first. You always took care of me, even when I wasn't your responsibility." I shook my head. "You were always my responsibility, Mia. The moment I decided to be your mom, that was it. You were my family." Mia's eyes misted over, and she gave me a teary smile. "I'm glad he's out of our lives. I've never liked how he treated you, and now we don't have to deal with his drama anymore." The sun had almost set, and the sky was a canvas of purples and oranges. I stood up, feeling more alive than I had in years. "Let's go inside. I'll make us dinner, our favorite spaghetti and meatballs." She hopped up, following me into the kitchen. "Can I help?" she asked, rolling up her sleeves. "Of course. You can start by rolling the meatballs." We moved around the kitchen together, a dance we had perfected over years of cooking side by side. As I watched her hands, so much like mine, shaping the meatballs, a sense of contentment washed over me. This is what real family feels like, I thought. There were no harsh words here, no expectations or disappointments. Just me and Mia, and a future we could shape into whatever we wanted. Our laughter and the aromatic sense of our shared cooking efforts filled the kitchen, and I knew, deep down, that this was what happiness felt like. After years of just going through the motions, I was finally living, and I had the real family, my daughter, to thank for it. My name is Sarah, and this is my story. I'm married to Tom, a kind-hearted man with a smile that could light up the darkest room. We've been married for 4 years, but it feels like we've been together for a lifetime. We met at a local coffee shop, bumped into each other by accident, and the rest, as they say, is history. But there's one part of my life that feels more like a recurring bad dream. Martha, Tom's mom. Martha is, well, she's a character. Since we got married, she's had this habit of dropping by unannounced. It was annoying at first, but now it's just part of our daily routine. She's got something to say about everything and anything I do, and it's never praise. It was just another Tuesday evening. I was in the kitchen, the aroma of roasted chicken filling the air, setting the table for 3. Tom was on his way home, and Martha, of course, decided to pop in. "Chicken, Sarah? Again?" Martha walked into the kitchen, her voice dripping with disappointment. "If it were me, I'd have made pork. Tom loves my pork roast." I tried to keep my cool. "Tom likes chicken too, Martha, and it's healthier." She clicked her tongue, moving closer to inspect the salad. "Lettuce and tomatoes. How original." Just then, Tom walked in. "Something smells good," he said, wrapping his arms around me. He kissed my cheek before noticing his mother. "Mom, what a surprise." "Not a good one, apparently," Martha muttered, eyeing the chicken like it had personally offended her. Tom caught my eye, a silent plea there. "Be nice to her," it said. "She's had a tough year." I sighed, the fight draining out of me. "Dinner's ready. Let's eat." We sat down, and the usual happened. Tom talked about his day. I chimed in with stories of my own, and Martha found a way to criticize every single thing. When Tom complimented the chicken, saying it was just as good as any pork roast, I saw Martha's lips thin, but for once, she kept quiet. That night, as Tom and I cleaned up, and Martha watched her favorite game show in the living room, I wondered how many more dinners like this I could take. It wasn't the chicken or the pork that was the problem. It was the constant feeling of not being good enough for the woman who mattered most to Tom. But as I looked at Tom, who was whistling while drying the dishes, I knew I'd endure it, for him. Because that's what you do for love, right? You put up with a little rain to get to the rainbow. Or in my case, a little bit of Martha to get to the rest of my life with Tom. If life were a straight road, mine had taken a turn into a lane with speed bumps named Martha. When I found out I was pregnant, Tom and I were over the moon. But joy comes with its own set of challenges. My job as an event planner was demanding, with hours as unpredictable as Martha's mood swings. So I made the tough choice to step down to a less taxing role, which unfortunately meant a smaller paycheck. It was a Sunday morning, and I was flipping pancakes, humming to myself, feeling content. Tom was reading at the table, and then, as if on cue, Martha walked in, her presence immediately changing the air. "So, Sarah, how does it feel to contribute less to the household?" Martha didn't waste any time, going straight for the jugular as she poured herself a cup of coffee. I flipped another pancake, choosing my words carefully. "It feels responsible, Martha. I need to take care of myself and the baby." "Babies don't need money, huh? Interesting logic," she retorted, taking a sip and making a face. "This coffee is weak." Tom looked up, his brow furrowed. "Mom, that's not fair. Sarah is doing what's best for our family." Martha scoffed. "Oh, please. When I was pregnant, I worked until the day I gave birth, and I made sure to contribute equally." I plated the pancakes and sat down, trying to keep the peace. "Times are different now, Martha, and I'm still working, just not as much." She shook her head, her disapproval as clear as the sunny day outside. "You just make sure you don't get too comfortable. Money doesn't grow on trees." The conversation hung heavy over breakfast, Even the pancakes tasted like tension. Tom squeezed my hand under the table, a silent show of support. But as I watched Martha pick at her food with a sour expression, I knew this was far from over. I was bracing myself for a long road ahead, full of Martha's backhanded comments. But in my heart, I knew the peace of mind from a lesser-stressed pregnancy was worth any pay cut. And I'd do it all over again if it meant a healthier me and a healthier baby. Life has a funny way of flipping the script. Before Jamie, my home office was a place of tranquility. Now it's a circus, and I'm the juggler. Working from home while taking care of a newborn is like trying to thread a needle on a roller coaster. But it's our roller coaster, and I wouldn't trade it for the world. One Wednesday afternoon, as I was knee-deep in emails and baby burp cloths, the doorbell rang. I knew without looking. It was Martha. "Just a minute," I called out, balancing Jamie on one hip and my laptop on the other. When I opened the door, there she stood, purse and judgment in hand. "You look like you could use some help," she remarked, pushing past me into the living room. I followed her, settling Jamie into his bouncer. "I've got it under control, Martha. It's just a busy day." She peered at my laptop screen, then at Jamie, who was trying to decide if he was hungry or sleepy. "Doesn't seem like it. You know, when Tom was a baby, I made sure everything was spotless, and he was always my focus." I bit my tongue, resisting the urge to defend my scattered living room. "Well, times have changed, Martha. Working from home is a balancing act." She sat down, watching me like a hawk. "Does Tom know how chaotic it is here?" I sat across from her, trying to maintain a sense of calm. "Tom understands. He knows I'm doing my best." Martha tutted, looking around with thinly veiled disapproval. I suppose your best will have to do." I wanted to tell her that my best was more than enough, that I was a good mom and a good worker. But with Jamie starting to fuss, I didn't have the energy for another round with her. As she left, Martha's parting words were, "Remember, Sarah, a mother's place is with her child, not with her work." I closed the door gently, leaning against it for a moment. Her words stung, but as I picked up Jamie and he smiled, all gums and drool, I knew I was doing all right. Work can wait. These moments with Jamie cannot. And if that means my living room is a bit messy, so be it. It's our mess, and it's perfect. 4 years into our marriage, and life had settled into a rhythm, albeit one constantly interrupted by the discordant notes of my mother-in-law, Martha's visits. The first year of Jamie's life was a whirlwind of diapers, late-night lullabies, and the struggle of maintaining a career from the confines of our home. Now, as I stepped back into the professional arena, my heart ached with the separation from my little boy, but also fluttered with the excitement of reclaiming a piece of my identity. The office was just as I remembered, yet everything felt different. Colleagues welcomed me back with smiles and gentle inquiries about Jamie. My desk, once a shrine to efficiency, now also housed a colorful array of drawings and a photo of Jamie's toothless grin. Each email I sent was punctuated by thoughts of him, each project plan a reminder of the plans I had for his future. Arriving home that evening felt like crossing a finish line. I was greeted by the music of Jamie's giggles as Tom, ever the doting father, flew him around the living room like an airplane. They were in their own world, and for a moment, I was an outsider looking in. It was a pang of jealousy only a mother returning to work could understand. Before I could even kick off my shoes, the door swung open and Martha made her entrance. "Sarah, back to work I see. And Jamie?" she asked, her tone laced with accusation. "He's been at daycare, and he's doing great," I said, trying to keep my voice light as I took Jamie into my arms. She raised an eyebrow, a silent judgment I knew all too well. "Daycare? At his age? I never would have." Tom intervened. "Mom, the world's different now. We're doing what's right for our family." Martha huffed, moving to the kitchen. "Well, I hope you know what you're doing." The conversation hung in the air, a stalemate of generational differences. Tom and I exchanged a weary look. This was our normal, a delicate dance of defending our choices. Dinner was a quiet affair, Jamie's high chair an island of cheer in a sea of unspoken tensions. Martha barely touched her food, her disapproval a palpable presence at the table. Afterward, as Tom put Jamie to bed, I found myself alone with Martha. "Martha, I know you don't agree with our choices, but I need you to trust that we're doing what's best for Jamie," I said, clearing the plates. She looked at me, her eyes softening for just a second. "Sarah, I just want what's best for him too." "I know, and I appreciate that. But best can mean different things," I replied, hoping to bridge the gap between us. She nodded slowly. "I suppose you're right, but it doesn't mean I have to like it." As I finished the chores and sat down to catch up on some work, the house quieted down. I mulled over the day's events, the juggle between professional and personal, the constant scrutiny from Martha. Each thought was a thread in the complex tapestry of modern motherhood. Over the next few weeks, I found my stride, balancing deadlines with daycare drop-offs, boardroom meetings with bedtime stories. I was proving to myself, more than to Martha, that I could excel at both roles. But her words lingered like a shadow, a reminder of the tightrope I walked daily. One evening, as I watched Jamie sleep, his chest rising and falling in peaceful slumber, I realized that this was my why. The long hours, the missed cuddles, they were all for this moment of tranquility, for the future we were building. And as I turned off the light, a sense of determination settled in my heart. Martha might never understand, but that was okay. This was our life, our choices, our grind. And with Tom and Jamie by my side, I was ready for all of it. When Tom and I approached Martha about watching Jamie while I worked, she accepted with a strange spark in her eye. "Of course I'll watch him. A grandmother's place is with her grandchild," she had said, almost triumphantly. The first day, I left Jamie with her, armed with a list of instructions and a kiss on his forehead. "If you need anything, call me," I reminded her, feeling the familiar tug at my heart as I walked out the door. "Sarah, go to work. We'll be fine," Martha said, her voice tinged with the confidence that only grandmothers possess. But as the days passed, her enthusiasm began to wane. Each evening, I returned to a litany of complaints. "He wouldn't nap. He's too fidgety. He throws his food," she'd report with exasperation. One evening, as I handed her a cup of tea, I ventured cautiously, "Martha, if it's too much, we can look into a daycare for Jamie." She set her cup down with a clatter. "No, I don't trust those places. I'll watch him." "But you seem so tired, and I hate seeing you like this," I replied, concern lacing my words. Martha's eyes met mine, stubborn as ever. "I said no, Sarah. I'm his grandmother. It's my job to endure. And who better to look after him than family?" Her refusal was a familiar dance, one where my suggestions were met with resistance, my concerns with cold rebuttals. "Okay, Martha, if that's what you want," I acquiesced, knowing that arguing was futile. Each morning, I left Jamie in her care, my heart squeezed tight with worry. Each evening, I returned to find Martha a little more worn, a little less patient, but always insistent that she would continue caring for him. Her resilience was as admirable as it was frustrating. I watched her pour her love into Jamie, even as it drained her, and I was left in a constant state of gratitude and guilt. Tom and I would talk after Jamie's bedtime, turning over options in quiet conversation, but we always circled back to Martha's steadfast refusal to let anyone else take over. Just when I thought we had settled into our new normal with Martha looking after Jamie, the unthinkable happened. I was in the middle of a work presentation when my cell phone buzzed incessantly in my pocket. Excusing myself, I stepped out to see Martha's number on the screen. "Martha, I'm at work. Is everything okay?" I answered, my voice tight with concern. "Sarah, I can't do this today. You need to come and get Jamie. Now." Martha's voice was terse, frazzled. I felt a surge of anxiety. "What's wrong? Is Jamie all right?" "He's fine, but I'm not. I need you to come. I can't handle this," she insisted. Panic knotted my stomach. "I can't just leave work at a moment's notice, Martha. Can it wait until my lunch break?" There was a pause, and then, "You'll regret not coming," she said ominously, and hung up. My heart raced. I called back, no answer. I called the daycare to see if they could take Jamie last minute. They could, but I needed to drop him off. I rushed back to my presentation, my mind far from work. An hour later, as soon as I could, I hurried to my car, calling Martha again. Still no answer. Then, a call from an unknown number stopped me dead in my tracks. "Mrs. Thomas? This is Officer Daniels. We have Jamie here at the police station. A woman brought him in, said she couldn't care for him anymore." My breath caught in my throat. "I'll be right there." I sped to the station, thoughts whirling in chaos. Tom met me there, his face pale with worry. "Mr. and Mrs. Thomas?" The officer greeted us. "Your son is safe. The woman, she said she was the grandmother, left him here. She claimed she was feeling unwell." Relief flooded me at the sight of Jamie in the officer's arms, unharmed. "Thank you," I managed to say, taking Jamie into my embrace. Tom and I exchanged a look, the same question in our eyes. What do we do about Martha? We found her at home, sitting on the sofa, flipping through a magazine. "Mom, what happened? Why did you leave Jamie at the police station?" Tom's voice was a mix of anger and disbelief. Martha looked up, unfazed. "I told Sarah I couldn't do it. I wasn't feeling well, and I needed rest." "But you left our son with the police," I exclaimed, still holding Jamie tightly. She shrugged. "I knew they'd find you. I just needed some peace and quiet." Tom ran his hands through his hair, frustration etched on his face. "You can't just abandon a child, Mom, especially not your grandson." Martha sighed, a theatrical display of exhaustion. "Well, I told you I needed you to come, Sarah. You should have come." The implication that this was my fault stung, and I realized then that Martha's manipulations knew no bounds. This wasn't just about her being tired or ill. It was about control. As we put Jamie to bed that night, his small frame snuggled between us. The severity of Martha's actions sank in. This was a breach of trust that couldn't be mended with apologies or excuses. We had to protect our little family, and unfortunately, that meant setting boundaries with Martha. She had taken her opposition to me too far, and we couldn't risk Jamie's safety on her whims. The morning after the police station incident, our house was steeped in a heavy silence. Tom and I sat at the kitchen table, cups of coffee untouched, while Jamie played with his toys on the floor, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing around him. "We need to talk to her, Tom. What she did." I started, the anger from the night before simmering in my voice. Tom nodded, his face grim. "I know. I'll call her." He dialed Martha's number, and I could hear the faint sound of a ringtone from the living room where she slept. There was a click, and then her voice. "Tom, what is it?" "Mom, why didn't you tell us you were feeling unwell before taking Jamie to the police?" Tom's voice was steady, but I could hear the underlying strain. There was a pause on the other end. I just needed to rest. I thought they would call you immediately." Martha's voice was a mix of defensiveness and weariness. "But that's not the way to handle it, Mom. You scared us to death." Tom pressed on. "I didn't mean to." Martha's voice cracked, and I wasn't sure if it was genuine remorse or another act. Tom sighed. "We're going to see what the officers at the station say. They mentioned there was a recording." Martha was silent again, and then, "Fine. Do what you need to do." The call ended, and Tom and I got ready to go to the station. We needed answers. At the station, Officer Daniels greeted us. "We have the footage from when she brought Jamie in. You should see this." We braced ourselves as the officer played the video. There was Martha, looking calm and collected as she handed Jamie over to the officer. Her voice was clear, devoid of distress. "I can't do this anymore. He's the grandson." My heart sank. There was no sign of the sick, distressed grandmother she had claimed to be. "We need a copy of this," Tom said, his voice hard. Back home, Martha was pacing the living room. When we walked in, she turned to us, a question in her eyes. "We saw the footage, Martha," I said, my voice cold. "You weren't sick. You weren't in distress. You lied." Martha's face fell, and then, unexpectedly, she sat down, her shoulders slumping. I couldn't handle it. I thought I could, but..." Tom interrupted her. "You put Jamie at risk. You lied to us, to the police. How could you?" Tears streamed down Martha's face. but the theatrics didn't move us this time. "I'm sorry," she whispered. But it was too late. The trust was broken. That evening, after Martha had packed her things and left, Tom, Jamie, and I sat in the living room, a tight little circle. We didn't say much, but we didn't need to. We had each other, and we would move forward together. The truth had been painful, but it had also set us free. It had only been a few days since Martha had left when she unexpectedly reappeared at our doorstep. As if the incident had never occurred, she stood there with a smile, offering to watch Jamie. "Martha, what are you doing here?" I asked, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "I've come to help with Jamie, like before. You obviously need the help," she said, brushing past me into the house. I was dumbfounded. "Martha, after what happened, you think we can just go back to how things were?" She turned to me with a defiant look. "Well, it wouldn't have happened if you had come when I called," she retorted, her words sharp like daggers. Before I could respond, Tom walked in, his face darkening at the sight of his mother. "What are you saying, Mom? That this was Sarah's fault?" Martha's eyes didn't waver. If she had been a stay-at-home mother like she should be, none of this would have happened. That's when Tom exploded, the anger and frustration that had been simmering for days finally boiling over. "How dare you! You do this out of spite for Sarah, and you put Jamie in danger because of it." Martha recoiled as if slapped, her facade crumbling. "Tom, No, Mom, I don't want to hear it. You've crossed a line. You deliberately ignored Sarah. You neglected your grandson, and for what? To prove a point?" His voice was a crescendo of outrage. She tried to interrupt, to defend herself, but Tom wouldn't have it. "I can't trust you anymore, Mom. I don't want you here. I don't want to talk to you until you realize the gravity of what you've done." Martha looked between us, the realization dawning that she had indeed gone too far. Without another word, she turned and left, the finality of the moment hanging heavy in the air. Tom turned to me, his eyes filled with a mixture of regret and resolve. "I'm sorry, Sarah. I should have seen it sooner, but I promise you, Jamie's safety comes first. We come first." I nodded, the solidarity between us more potent than ever. "I know, Tom. We'll get through this, just like we always do. Together." We knew the road ahead would be without Martha, at least for the foreseeable future. It was a painful but necessary decision, a line drawn to protect our son, our family, our peace. My name's Camilla, and I'm 30 years old. I live in a cozy house, a place full of memories, left to me by my dear grandmother. It's been my sanctuary, my little world where everything just feels right. But, as life would have it, not everything outside these walls is as peaceful. You see, my family is a bit of a mixed bag. There's my husband John, a man of few words, who always seems to be caught in the middle of things. We've had our ups and downs, but who doesn't, right? Then there's my father-in-law, Robert. He was a gem, the kind of man who could light up a room with his smile. I always wondered how he ended up with Helen, my mother-in-law. To put it nicely, Helen is difficult. And that's me being polite. And let's not forget Lucy, John's sister. She lives nearby with her husband and kids in a rented apartment. Lucy and I never really clicked. Maybe it's because she's so much like Helen. I remember this one evening, a typical family dinner at our place. Robert was there, and as usual, he was the life of the party. "Camilla, this lasagna is divine," Robert said with a grin, taking another hearty bite. "Thank you, Robert. It's Grandma's recipe," I replied with a smile. Helen, on the other hand, barely touched her food. She just pushed it around her plate, looking like she'd rather be anywhere else. "It's a bit too salty, don't you think?" she said, her voice sharp. John shot me an apologetic glance across the table. I just shrugged it off. "That's Helen for you, always a critic." Lucy chimed in. "Mom, it's fine. Not everyone has your taste buds." The conversation moved on, but the tension lingered, as it always did when Helen was around. After dinner, Robert pulled me aside. "Camilla, I just want to say I really appreciate how you handle Helen. You have the patience of a saint." I laughed. "Well, I try, Robert, but it's not easy." He patted my shoulder. "You're doing great, dear. Just hang in there." If only I knew then how much more hanging in there I'd have to do. That's the thing about life in our little family. You never know what's coming next, especially with Helen and Lucy in the mix. But back then, it was just the usual. A little bit of discomfort, a lot of biting my tongue and trying to keep the peace. Little did I know, the storm was just around the corner. Life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect it. And one of those came crashing into our lives one cold, dreary morning. Robert, the one person who brought some light into our often tense family gatherings, passed away. It was sudden, a heart attack, they said. He was the glue that held us all together, and without him, things started to unravel quickly. The day after we got the news, I found myself in our kitchen, a steaming cup of coffee in hand, lost in thought. John walked in, looking like he hadn't slept a wink. "He was the best dad anyone could ask for," John said, his voice heavy with sadness. I reached out, placing my hand over his. "I know, honey. He was wonderful. We're going to miss him so much." John nodded, wiping away a tear. "Mom's taking it hard. She's a mess." That wasn't hard to imagine. Helen without Robert was like a ship without a rudder, lost and directionless. And true to form, she became more difficult than ever. Every phone call with her was like walking on eggshells. A week later, we were at Helen's house. Lucy was there too, her eyes red from crying. The air was thick with grief and unspoken tension. "We need to talk about what's next for Mom," Lucy said, breaking the uneasy silence. John sighed. "Yeah, we do. She can't be alone in that big house. She needs someone around, just in case." Helen's gaze shifted to me, her eyes narrowing. "I don't want strangers in my house. What about Camilla? She's home most of the time." I felt my heart sink. This was not what I had signed up for. "Helen, maybe you could stay with Lucy. She's got more space, and the kids would love to have you around." But Helen shook her head, her lips a thin line. "Lucy's place is always so noisy, and I can't stay in this house filled with memories of Robert." The conversation went around in circles, with no one willing to back down. Lucy seemed relieved at the thought of not having her mother move in with her. John looked torn between his mother and me, not sure which side to take. We left Helen's house that day with no resolution in sight. I could feel the storm clouds gathering, a sense of dread settling over me. How were we going to navigate this? How was I going to deal with Helen under my own roof, in the house that was once my sanctuary? As we drove home, John reached for my hand. "We'll figure this out, Camilla. Together, we will defend our independence." I wanted to believe him, I really did. But deep down, I knew things were about to get a whole lot more complicated. The air was tense when we all gathered again at Helen's house. The living room felt smaller than usual, crowded with unspoken thoughts and emotions. Lucy was there, fidgeting nervously, while her husband, Mark, tried to look anywhere but at Helen. John and I sat on the edge of our seats, bracing for whatever was coming. "So, have we decided what to do about Mom?" Lucy finally broke the silence. Helen, who had been staring out the window, turned sharply. "I've made up my mind," she declared. "I'm giving this house to you, Lucy, and I'm moving in with Camilla and John." My jaw dropped. "What? Helen, we didn't discuss this." Lucy's face lit up, a stark contrast to the shock on mine. "Really, Mom? That would be great." John looked at me and tried to intervene. "Mom, we need to talk about this. It's not that simple." Helen's eyes narrowed. "What's there to talk about? Camilla has plenty of space, and she works from home. It's settled." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Helen, this is a big decision. And what about Lucy? She has more room, and the kids—" Helen cut me off. "Lucy's house is always in chaos with those children. I need peace and quiet." John gave me a helpless look, clearly torn. "Camilla, maybe we can make it work. For a while, at least." So Helen hasn't changed her mind since our last meeting. I felt my frustration mounting. "John, we can't just rearrange our lives because Helen decides so. What about our privacy? Our life?" Lucy chimed in, her voice a little too eager and triumphantly. "Camilla, think about it. Mom needs us now. You wouldn't want her to be alone, would you?" I felt like I was being cornered, my own home slipping away from me. It's not about that, Lucy. It's about making a decision that affects all of us. We need to think this through. But it was clear that Helen had made up her mind, and Lucy was all too happy to support her decision. John turned out to be too soft, not independent, to make a decision in our favor. As we left Helen's house that day, the weight of the situation settled heavily on my shoulders. I was about to lose the one place where I had always felt safe and at peace, my sanctuary, and there was nothing I could do about it. The days following that dreaded meeting were some of the longest in my life. I tried to argue with John, to make him see reason, but it was like talking to a brick wall. "Camilla, she's my mother. What do you want me to do? Turn her away?" It wasn't that I wanted to turn Helen away. I just wanted a say in what happened in my own home. But it seemed like my say didn't count for much. Before I knew it, the day came when Helen moved in. She arrived with more luggage than I thought possible for one person. My once serene living room was now cluttered with her things. "I hope you don't mind, Camilla. I need all my things around me," Helen said, directing the movers here and there. I forced a smile, hiding my frustration. "Of course, Helen. Make yourself at home." As the days turned into weeks, my patience wore thin. Helen had a way of making her presence felt in every corner of the house. She criticized my cooking, my cleaning, even the way I arranged the living room furniture. One evening, as I was trying to make dinner, Helen came into the kitchen. "You're cutting the carrots all wrong. Here, let me show you how it's done." I bit my tongue, handing her the knife. "Sure, Helen, show me." John walked in just then, and I could see he was trying to gauge the situation. "Everything okay here?" "Just teaching Camilla a thing or two about cooking," Helen said, a hint of smugness in her voice. I kept quiet, focusing on the onions I was chopping. John lingered for a moment, an awkward spectator, before mumbling something about checking the mail and leaving the kitchen. It wasn't just the constant criticism that got to me. It was the way Helen managed to turn John against me. Every time I tried to talk to him about how I felt, he accused me of being insensitive. "Camilla, she's going through a tough time. Can't you just cut her some slack?" John would say. I felt like I was losing not just my home, but my husband too. Then came the day when Helen decided she didn't like the color of the living room walls. "They're too dull. We need something brighter." I found myself reluctantly agreeing to repaint the room, just to keep the peace. As I watched the painters covering my once favorite shade of blue with a garish yellow that Helen had picked, I realized how much of my life I was giving up. My home didn't feel like mine anymore, and I wasn't sure how much more of this I could take. Living with Helen was like being on a never-ending roller coaster, except there were no thrilling moments, just a constant churning in the pit of my stomach. She had a complaint for everything. The food wasn't to her taste, the house wasn't clean enough, and the TV was never on the channel she liked. One evening, as I was trying to finish up some work on my laptop, Helen barged into the room, the TV remote in her hand. "Camilla, this TV is driving me nuts. I can't find my show." I sighed, closing my laptop. "Let me help you, Helen." As I flipped through the channels, trying to find her show, Helen muttered under her breath about how everything was better at her house. John walked in at that moment, and I looked up at him, hoping for some support. "John, can you please help your mother with the TV? I'm trying to finish my work." John frowned, looking from me to Helen. "Can't you see she's struggling, Camilla? It's just a TV show." I felt a surge of frustration. "It's not just about the TV, John. It's about having a little space to do my work, to have a moment of peace in my own house." Helen looked at John, her eyes welling up. "I didn't mean to be a burden. I just wanted to watch my show." John's expression softened as he turned to his mother. "Don't worry, Mom. I'll find your show." I watched as John took the remote from me and started channel surfing, trying to appease Helen. I felt invisible, unheard. The next day, Lucy dropped by with her kids. The house was chaotic, with the kids running around and Helen trying to dictate how to entertain them. I retreated to the kitchen to prepare some snacks, feeling overwhelmed. Lucy followed me into the kitchen, a smirk on her face. "Looks like Mom's really settled in, huh?" I didn't even try to mask my irritation. "It's a lot, Lucy. It's not easy having your entire home life turned upside down." Lucy shrugged, unconcerned. "Well, she's family. You just have to deal with it. That evening, as we all sat down for dinner, the tension was palpable. Helen criticized the pasta I made. John was silent, and Lucy's kids were restless. I finally snapped. I can't do this anymore. I need some space, some respect in my own home. Helen gasped, and John shot me a look of disbelief. Camilla, how can you be so selfish? I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. Selfish? I've been nothing but accommodating. This is my home too, John. The argument escalated, voices raised, words flying like daggers. John stormed out of the room, and Helen sat there, looking smug. That night, as I lay in bed, listening to the muffled sounds of the TV from the living room where Helen slept, I realized something had to change. I couldn't live like this anymore. But how was I going to make John see that? How was I going to reclaim my life? The days after the big argument were filled with a tense silence. John and I barely spoke, and Helen acted like she owned the place, more so than ever. I felt like a stranger in my own home, tiptoeing around to avoid any confrontations. But the universe seemed to have other plans for me. One day, I came home early from the grocery store. The house was unusually quiet. As I was putting away the groceries, I heard hushed voices coming from the living room. Curiosity got the better of me, and I tiptoed closer. It was Helen and Lucy, deep in conversation. I couldn't believe my ears when I heard what they were saying. And now I don't have to deal with yours noisy kids all day, Helen was saying with a chuckle. Moving in with Camilla and John was the best decision. Camilla does everything around the house, and I have all the peace I want. Lucy's voice was equally gleeful. And I get Dad's house without paying a dime. It worked out perfectly for us. My hands were shaking, and I felt a surge of anger like never before. They had been playing us all along. This wasn't about family or taking care of each other. It was a cold, calculated move. I stormed into the living room, my voice shaking with anger. I heard everything. How could you, Helen? And you, Lucy? Helen looked up, startled. Then her expression turned into one of defiance. What are you talking about, Camilla? We were just chatting. Lucy tried to play innocent. Yeah, Camilla, you must have misunderstood. But I was done being the understanding, accommodating daughter-in-law. No, I heard you both. You've been using us, manipulating the situation for your benefit. Helen's face hardened. You have no right to speak to me like that. I am your elder, and you should respect me. John walked in at that moment, confused. What's going on here? I turned to him, my eyes welling up with tears of frustration. John, they've been using us. Your mother and sister planned all this just so they could get what they wanted. John looked from me to Helen and Lucy, his expression one of disbelief. Is this true, Mom? Helen started to cry, playing the victim. She's lying, John. I would never do such a thing. John seemed torn, unsure of whom to believe. I could see the doubt in his eyes, and it broke my heart. He still didn't trust me, even after everything. That night, as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I knew things couldn't go on like this. I had to take a stand for my own sanity. The next day, I was going to have a serious talk with John. It was time to put an end to this charade, one way or another. That morning, I knew it was time for a frank conversation with John. The house was quiet, the tension from the previous night still lingering in the air. I waited in the kitchen, my thoughts racing, until John finally walked in, his face a mask of worry. John, we need to talk about everything that's happening, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He poured himself a coffee and sat down, looking exhausted. Camilla, I just don't know what to think anymore. Think about us, John. Your mother and sister are tearing us apart, I urged. Before we could delve deeper, Helen walked in, her timing too perfect. John, are you going to let her speak about your family like that? The conversation quickly heated up. I tried to explain, to make him see the truth, but Helen's presence was like a fuse, igniting John's temper. You're being unreasonable, Camilla. How can you be so heartless towards my mother? John's voice rose with each word. Frustrated and desperate, I shot back, Heartless? I'm trying to save our home, our marriage. In the heat of the moment, Helen clutched her chest dramatically, gasping. My heart? How can you do this to me? John spun around, his anger flaring. Look what you're doing to her, Camilla! And then, in a flash of fury, John's hand struck my face. The shock of it silenced the room. Helen stood there, a triumphant grin barely hidden. I touched my lip, feeling the sting of the slap and the flowing blood, and the reality of what just happened hit me. My husband had chosen his manipulative mother over me, our marriage. Without a word, I picked up the phone and called the police. As I waited for them, I began to pack Helen's and John's belongings, methodically, my movements fueled by a mix of hurt and determination. John tried to apologize, his anger now replaced with anxiety. Camilla, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to. But it was too late. I'm filing for divorce, John. I can't be in a marriage where I'm not respected, where I'm not safe. The police arrived, and I explained everything. John and Helen were quiet, the reality of their situation finally dawning on them. After the police left, I dragged the suitcases to the front door. Helen's face was a picture of shock as I placed them outside. This is your stuff. You need to leave now, I said, my voice void of any emotion. John picked up the suitcases, his eyes avoiding mine. Helen wanted to scold me again, but then followed him, her triumphant act gone, replaced by a dawning realization of what she had lost. As the door closed behind them, the silence of the house enveloped me. It was a painful moment, but also one of clarity. I had stood up for myself, chosen my dignity over a broken marriage. Now, it was time to rebuild my life on my own terms, in my own home. After the divorce was finalized, I found myself in a quiet, almost surreal calm. My house, once a battleground of tension and conflict, was now solely mine again. I spent the first few days just walking through the rooms, taking in the emptiness, the peace that had returned. It felt like waking up from a long, troubled dream. I started by returning the house to its former appearance, undoing the changes Helen had imposed. Each shift, each movement, felt like a step towards reclaiming my life. The walls were repainted back to the soothing blue I loved, the furniture rearranged to the way it used to be. With each change, a sense of normalcy and tranquility returned. My new routine was simple but fulfilling. Mornings were spent in the garden, tending to the flowers that had been neglected, and evenings were for reading books in the quiet of my living room. The house, with all its memories, began to feel like a home again. One afternoon, while pruning the roses, my neighbor, Mrs. Jenkins, called out from over the fence. Camilla, dear, I heard about your divorce. I'm so sorry. I smiled at her, wiping the sweat from my brow. Thank you, Mrs. Jenkins. It's been tough, but I'm getting there. She leaned in closer, a conspiratorial glint in her eye. You know, I hear things haven't been so peaceful at Helen's place either. The whole neighborhood knows about their squabbles. The police have been called there a few times already. I wasn't surprised. Helen, John, Lucy, her husband, and their kids all under one roof was a recipe for constant chaos. I can imagine. Too many conflicting personalities in one space. Mrs. Jenkins shook her head. You're better off without that drama, dear. You always were too good for them. I laughed, the sound light and free. I'm starting to realize that now. Days turned into weeks, and I began to rediscover parts of myself that I had lost in the turmoil of my marriage. I started painting again, something I hadn't done since college. The strokes of the brush on the canvas were like whispers of a newfound freedom. Occasionally, I'd hear snippets of the ongoing drama at Helen's house. It was a stark reminder of the bullet I had dodged. Their house, once a symbol of familial unity, had become a pressure cooker of arguments and disagreements. In those moments, I felt a twinge of sadness for John, but it was quickly replaced by a sense of relief. I had escaped that life, that endless cycle of unhappiness. I was free to live on my terms, to find happiness in the little things, my garden, my art, my peaceful home. As I sat on my porch one evening, watching the sunset, I realized that this was a new chapter in my life. A chapter where I was the author, free to write my story, one day at a time. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, that uncertainty was exciting, filled with possibilities. I was ready to face whatever came next, on my own terms, in my own way. My name is Karen. 4 years ago, I stepped into a life I thought was perfect. Married at 27 to Michael, a man who promised to carry me in his arms before we even walked down the aisle, I felt like the luckiest woman alive. He wasn't just my husband, he was my best friend, my confidant. We shared everything, from morning coffees to late-night dreams about our future. Michael always had a way of making me feel special. I remember our first anniversary. He recreated our first date, down to the same table at the quaint Italian restaurant where we first realized we were meant for each other. It wasn't just about the grand gestures, it was the little things. The way he'd brush the hair from my face, the soft kisses he'd plant on my forehead when he thought I was asleep. Our life together was bliss, filled with laughter and love. We lived in a beautiful house, spacious and filled with light. It was our haven, a place where we planned to raise a family. My job as a fitness trainer at a popular gym brought me joy and fulfillment, and Michael was thriving in his career. We were doing well financially, and we often talked about starting a family, about having kids running around the house, filling it with even more laughter and joy. Evelyn, Michael's mother, was a strong presence in our lives. From the first time I met her, she showered me with compliments. "You're absolutely stunning, Karen, just like a Hollywood actress from the 50s, she'd said, her eyes sparkling with genuine fondness. She often spoke about how beautiful our children would be, combining my looks with Michael's charm. Her approval meant the world to me. But then, one ordinary evening, everything changed. I was driving home from the gym, my mind buzzing with plans for the weekend. Michael and I had planned a small getaway, just the two of us, a chance to reconnect and talk more about our future, about finally starting that family we'd always wanted. As I approached the intersection, a song we both loved started playing on the radio. I smiled, turning up the volume, lost in the moment. That's when it happened. Out of nowhere, a car ran the red light and slammed into my side. The impact was deafening, a cacophony of crunching metal and shattering glass. My head whipped to the side, and pain erupted across my face and body. The world spun wildly, a blur of lights and sounds, and then, as quickly as it had all started, everything plunged into silence and darkness. Waking up in the hospital was like emerging into a world I no longer recognized. My body was a patchwork of aches and bandages. The first few days were a blur of doctors, painkillers, and Michael's face, etched with worry. Michael sat beside me, holding my hand. His voice was gentle, but his eyes couldn't hide his concern. "Hey, how are you feeling?" he asked. I tried to smile, but it hurt. "Like I've been hit by a truck," I joked weakly. He offered a strained smile, but said nothing. The nurses were kind, always checking in, offering comforting words. But their eyes, full of pity, told a story they didn't voice. I knew I was badly hurt, but the extent of it was hidden beneath the bandages that wrapped my face. As days turned into a week, Michael's visits grew shorter, his excuses more frequent. "Work's crazy right now," he'd say, or "Mom needs my help with something." I understood, or at least I tried to, but the silence and the solitude in the hospital room were suffocating. The day came to remove the bandages. I sat in front of a mirror, my heart racing. The nurse, a kind woman named Lisa, offered me an encouraging smile. "Ready?" she asked. I nodded, not trusting my voice. Slowly, she unwrapped the bandages, revealing my reflection bit by bit. The face staring back at me was a stranger's, scarred, distorted, a stark contrast to the woman I used to be. I couldn't hold back the tears. Lisa put a comforting hand on my shoulder. "It's still early days. Healing takes time," she said softly. I barely heard her. My thoughts were consumed by fear. What would Michael think? What would everyone think? I was no longer the woman he married. Michael's next visit was the hardest. He walked in, his usual confident stride faltering as he saw my face. "Hey," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I looked away, unable to meet his eyes. "It's bad, isn't it?" I asked, my voice trembling. Michael paused, struggling to find the right words. It's not that bad. You're still you." But the way he said it, the way he couldn't quite look at me, spoke volumes. I lay there, feeling a chasm growing between us. The man who had promised to carry me through life seemed lost, unsure of how to bridge the gap that my scars had created. He came out of the hospital room, and I overheard him on the phone. His words, meant to be private, cut through me like a knife. "I don't know, Mom. She became ugly. It's hard to look at her," he said, and there was something like disgust in his voice. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, tears streaming down my face. I felt betrayed, not by his words, but by the realization that his love had conditions I was no longer able to meet. I mourned for my lost beauty, for the love I thought was unconditional, and for the future that now seemed like a distant dream. Returning home was supposed to be a relief, a step towards normalcy. But as I crossed the threshold of the house that once symbolized love and warmth, I felt sick because of the suffocating atmosphere of hostility, hidden hints, and disgust. The first few days, Michael was quiet, almost tiptoeing around me. Our conversations were strained, filled with awkward silences. I tried to bridge the gap, to reach out to him, but it felt like talking to a wall. One evening, as I sat on the couch trying to read, Michael walked in. He glanced at me, then quickly looked away. "How was your day?" I asked, hoping to start some kind of conversation. He shrugged, keeping his eyes fixed on the TV. "It was okay. Busy." I nodded, feeling a knot in my stomach. "I was thinking, maybe this weekend we could go out, just to get some fresh air." Michael hesitated, then said, "I don't think it's a good idea. Maybe you should rest more." His words stung. It wasn't about resting. It was about not wanting to be seen with me. I turned my attention back to my book, but the words blurred through my tears. It wasn't just Michael. Evelyn's visits were even more difficult. She would come in, her face twisted in a poorly disguised grimace as she looked at me. Her words were polite, but her eyes were cold. One day, she sat across from me, her gaze wandering everywhere but my face. "It's such a shame what happened," she said, a tinge of something like disgust in her voice. I clenched my fists, trying to maintain my composure. "Yes, it is," I replied, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. Evelyn sighed, tapping her fingers on the table. "Well, we must all move on, right? Life doesn't stop." Her words, meant to be comforting, felt more like an attempt to avoid a difficult conversation. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Then came the night that broke me. I woke up to the sound of Michael's voice. He was on the phone, his words slurred. Curiosity got the better of me, and I crept closer to the door. "I can't do this anymore, Mom. She's a different person, a monster. I don't even recognize her," he slurred, his voice heavy with drink. I stood there, frozen, as his words echoed in my head. I was the same person, wasn't I? But to him, I was a stranger, a monster, someone he no longer loved or desired. I returned to bed, but sleep eluded me. The darkness of the room felt suffocating, a physical embodiment of the loneliness that had enveloped my life. Lying there, I realized that the home I once cherished no longer existed. It was just a house now, a place where I lived but no longer belonged. The changes in our home were like a slow, creeping fog, gradually obscuring the warmth and love that once filled it. Michael began coming home late, the smell of alcohol clinging to him like a second skin. His eyes, once so full of affection, now often glinted with irritation and something darker. One night, he staggered in, his steps unsteady. I sat up, concerned. "Michael, you're home late. Is everything okay?" He sneered, his words slurred. "Oh, now you care? You spend all day hiding in this house, and now you pretend to care about me?" I flinched, stung by his words. "Michael, you're drunk. Let's talk about this in the morning." He laughed bitterly, a sound that sent shivers down my spine. "What's there to talk about? Look at you. Look at us." I retreated to our room, tears stinging my eyes. The next day, I called Evelyn, hoping for some understanding, some support. "He's drinking a lot, coming home late, and he's mean," I told her, my voice breaking. Evelyn's response was curt, dismissive. It's normal, dear. Men do these things. He's just stressed, that's all. Her words were like a cold splash of water. I realized then that I was alone in this, that my pain and my struggles were mine to bear. The worst night came without warning. I woke up to bright flashes of light. Blinking away sleep, I saw Michael standing over me with his phone, taking pictures. His face was twisted in a drunken smirk. "What are you doing?" I asked, confusion and fear mingling in my voice. He laughed, a cruel, harsh sound. "I'm sending your photos to Hollywood. Maybe you can star in horror films now, no makeup needed." His words cut through me like a knife. I lay there, frozen, as he continued to snap pictures. Each click of the camera shutter a punctuation mark to my humiliation. After he left, I turned my face into the pillow, my body racked with sobs. The tears came in torrents, for the man I had lost, for the love that had turned to cruelty, and for the life that seemed to be slipping through my fingers. Humiliated by Michael's cruel remarks and feeling increasingly alienated, I started wearing a mask at home. It was a plain, white mask, hiding the scars that had become the focus of my existence. It was a small shield against the pain, a barrier between me and the world that had turned so cold. As I adjusted the mask one morning, looking at the blank face staring back at me in the mirror, my phone rang, cutting through the silence of the room. An unknown number flashed on the screen, and with a hesitant hand, I answered. "Hello, is this Mrs. Johnson?" The voice was unfamiliar, cautious yet sincere. "Yes, it's me. Who's this?" I replied, curiosity piqued. "My name is John. I was the father of the young man in your accident," he said, his voice laced with regret. A mix of emotions washed over me. "Oh, I see," I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. John paused before continuing. "I can't express how sorry I am for what happened. My son was troubled, and what he did, it was unforgivable. I want to do something to help, to make amends." His words, unexpected and heavy with sorrow, left me momentarily speechless. "How can you help?" I asked, skepticism mingling with a faint spark of hope. "I'd like to meet and discuss it in person. Would that be okay?" John's request was earnest, almost pleading. After a moment of hesitation, I agreed to meet him. Sitting across from John in a cafe, his eyes filled with remorse, I listened as he spoke. "Karen, I want to offer financial support for any surgeries or treatments that might help you," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. The offer was both overwhelming and tempting. I need to think about it," I replied, my mind racing with possibilities. I kept the meeting and the offer a secret from Michael and Evelyn. Their reactions, I feared, would only add to my confusion and pain. After days of internal debate, I decided to accept John's offer. I arranged consultations with plastic surgeons, discussing what could be done to help heal my scars. To Michael, I mentioned only that I was going for routine medical treatments. He didn't ask for details, and I didn't volunteer any, his indifference a stark contrast to the storm of emotions raging inside me. On the day of the surgery, as I lay on the operating table, the mask was removed, and for a moment I faced my scars unflinchingly. Closing my eyes, I allowed myself to dream, to hope for a future where the woman in the mirror would be someone I recognized, someone whole. Weeks turned into months since the surgery, and with each passing day, my face healed, slowly returning to what it once was. But I kept this transformation hidden under my mask, a secret held close to my chest. Michael, lost in his own world, didn't seem to notice or care. The day I returned home from my final follow-up appointment, the mask firmly in place, I braced myself. Michael and Evelyn were there, their expressions clouded with disdain as I walked in. The air was thick with unspoken contempt, a familiar yet unwelcome presence in what used to be our home. Michael's eyes met mine briefly before he looked away, his lips curling into a sneer. "Look at you, hiding behind that mask. Can't even face the world," he muttered. I remained silent, the mask my armor against his words. Without warning, he thrust a stack of papers towards me. They fluttered to the ground, divorce papers, a stark symbol of our failed marriage. "I'm done with this farce," he spat out. "Sign these and let's end it." I felt a cold calm settle over me. Picking up the papers, I signed them without a word, my pen steady, my resolve firmer than ever. Evelyn, standing nearby, scoffed. "Good riddance. We don't need an ugly reminder of your failure in our lives." Her words, meant to wound, barely grazed me. I had grown beyond their reach. With a small smile playing on my lips, I reached up and removed my mask, revealing my face, almost as it was before the accident. The shock on Michael's and Evelyn's faces was a picture I'd remember forever. Michael's eyes widened, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Evelyn's hand flew to her mouth, her earlier poise crumbling. But how?" Michael stammered, taking a step towards me. I looked at him, my smile growing. "You were too busy wallowing in your own misery to notice me, to see the person you vowed to love in sickness and in health." Michael's face crumbled, his earlier bravado fading. "Please, let's start over. We can forget all this happened." I laughed, not out of joy, but because of the absurdity of his words. "Forget? No, Michael. I won't forget how you treated me, how you made me feel. I'm leaving, but not because you or your mother want me to. I'm leaving for me." I gathered my bag, my signed divorce papers in hand, and walked past them, out of the house that was no longer a home. Their shocked faces were the last image I took with me, a reminder of how far I had come and the new life that awaited me. Starting over wasn't easy, but it was necessary. I moved into a small apartment, a space that was mine alone. It was here, among unpacked boxes and bare walls, that I began to rebuild my life. Returning to work at the fitness center was a big step. The familiar smell of the gym, the sound of weights clinking. It was comforting. My colleagues welcomed me back with open arms, their smiles genuine and warm. "Hey, Karen, you're back. We missed you around here," said Lisa, one of the trainers. I smiled, feeling a sense of belonging. It's good to be back. I've missed this place. As I resumed training sessions, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. With each class I taught, I grew stronger, not just physically, but emotionally too. I was finding myself again, rediscovering the woman who loved her job, who took pride in her strength. One day, after a particularly grueling session, I sat down on a bench, catching my breath. That's when John walked in. I hadn't seen him since our meeting at the cafe months ago. "Hello," he said, a tentative smile on his face. "I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd stop by. How are you?" I stood up, surprised but pleased to see him. "I'm doing well, thank you. It's good to see you, John." We talked for a while, about mundane things at first, the weather, the gym. Then, the conversation shifted to more personal topics. "I never got the chance to thank you properly," I said, my voice sincere. "Your help. It changed everything for me." John's smile was warm. "I'm just glad I could do something to make amends. You've come a long way." He hesitated for a moment before continuing. "I was wondering if maybe you'd like to grab a coffee sometime? No pressure, just as friends." The invitation caught me off guard, but it was a pleasant surprise. "I'd like that," I replied, a genuine smile spreading across my face. As I watched him leave the gym, I felt a flutter of excitement, a feeling I hadn't experienced in a long time. It was the beginning of something new, a chance to explore life from a fresh perspective. That night, as I lay in bed in my new apartment, I thought about the twists and turns my life had taken. There was still pain and healing ahead, but there was also hope. Hope for a future that was mine to shape. The dawn of a new day was breaking, and I was ready to meet it head on. The journey of life, I've come to realize, is never a straight path. It twists and turns, bringing challenges and surprises along the way. Since my divorce, I've been rediscovering who I am, but not without unexpected obstacles. Michael, unable to accept the end of our marriage, began reaching out, trying to rekindle what we once had. His persistence, a stark contrast to his earlier indifference, forced me to seek legal means to ensure my peace. It was a difficult decision, but necessary for my well-being. The day I stood in court, asking for a restraining order, I felt a mix of sadness and determination. sadness for what our relationship had become, and determination to protect my newfound independence. Meanwhile, my relationship with John was blossoming into something beautiful and profound. He was a constant source of support and understanding. On one of our dates, as we walked along a riverbank under the stars, he turned to me and said something that stayed with me. "You know, you were always beautiful, even with your scars. It's just that not everyone can look past the surface. Not everyone can see into the soul." I looked at him, touched by his words. "Thank you, John. That means more to me than you can imagine." He smiled, his eyes reflecting the starlight. "It's the truth, and I'm grateful for every part of you." That night, as I lay in bed, reflecting on everything that had happened, I felt a deep sense of contentment. My journey had been fraught with pain and heartache, but it had also led me to a place of self-acceptance and love. I realized then that the most profound form of love isn't about how we look or what we have. It's about being loved for our soul, for the essence of who we are. John saw me for me, scars and all, and cherished what he saw. Life had come full circle, but in a way I hadn't anticipated. I had lost a life I thought was perfect, only to find a deeper, more meaningful existence. I had learned to love myself and found someone who loved me for the person I had become. As I drifted off to sleep, I felt a sense of gratitude. Gratitude for the lessons learned, for the strength gained, and for the love that had found its way into my life. I had emerged from the shadows of my past, stepping into a future bright with promise and hope. From the moment I met Jake, I knew our lives would be a roller coaster. I was always the type to plan everything out. By the time I turned 28, I had a stable job as a lawyer, a nice apartment, and a clear idea of where I wanted my life to go. Financial stability was important to me, and I prided myself on my ability to manage my finances. Jake, on the other hand, was a whirlwind. The first time we met, he had this infectious energy about him that drew me in. He was a tall man with messy brown hair and a carefree smile that could melt anyone's heart. We met at a mutual friend's party. I was discussing a recent case I had won at work, and Jake walked over, drink in hand. "So, you're the famous lawyer Rachel everyone's talking about," he said with a smirk. I raised an eyebrow. "And who might you be?" "The guy who's about to change your life." He winked. Laughing, I replied, "That's a bold statement, but sure, I'll bite. Tell me, how do you plan on doing that?" Over the next few hours, we talked about everything, from our childhood memories to our future dreams. He told me about his love for adventure and how he often went on spontaneous trips just because he felt like it. He said he believed in living in the moment and enjoying every second of life. I found his perspective refreshing. Here I was, someone who always planned ahead, and then there was Jake, someone who took each day as it came. Over the next few months, our relationship blossomed. He introduced me to a world of spontaneity, and I brought a bit of order to his chaos. Our dates were always full of surprises. One day, he would take me out for a fancy dinner, and the next, we would be on a random road trip to nowhere. It wasn't just the fun times that made me fall for him. It was also the way he cared for me. He would always make sure I was okay, and he had this unique ability to make me feel special. One evening, after a particularly long day at work, I came home to find my apartment filled with candles and roses. Jake stood in the middle of the room, a huge grin on his face. "Thought you could use a little pick-me-up," he said. I smiled. "You always know how to make a bad day better." We settled into a routine, and before I knew it, we were talking about moving in together and even getting married. Our relationship had its challenges, especially when it came to our different views on money. I was always careful with my spending, while Jake was more impulsive. "Come on, let's just book that trip to Europe," he would often say. I would reply, "We need to plan it out, Jake. We can't just spend without thinking." He would just roll his eyes. "You worry too much." Despite our differences, we loved each other deeply. So, when he proposed, I said yes without hesitation. I believed that love could overcome any obstacle, and I was ready to start a new chapter of my life with Jake. Meeting the in-laws is always a nerve-wracking experience, but when Jake asked me to join a family dinner, I wasn't just nervous, I was curious. I had already heard snippets about Jake's family and their money habits, and I was eager to get the full picture. Their house was a large, sprawling mansion on the outskirts of the city. As we drove up the long driveway, I noticed the numerous cars parked outside, many of which looked brand new. As we entered, I was greeted with a loud cheer from Jake's relatives. They were a lively bunch, and the house was filled with laughter and chatter. Jake's mother, Linda, was a petite woman with a warm smile. She hugged me tightly and said, "It's so good to finally meet you." I smiled back. "Thank you for having me." Jake's father, Mark, was a tall, broad-shouldered man with a booming voice. "So, you're the lawyer who's captured our Jake's heart," he chuckled, shaking my hand firmly. "It seems that way," I laughed. Dinner was a grand affair. The table was laden with dishes, and wine glasses clinked cheerfully. As we ate, I observed the dynamics of Jake's family. They talked about their recent purchases and the vacations they had been on, or were planning to go on. Money seemed to flow freely in their conversations, and I got the sense that they didn't think twice before spending. Linda mentioned a recent shopping spree in Paris. Mark spoke of a new business venture that required a significant investment. Their younger daughter, Sarah, excitedly chatted about her plans to study abroad. At one point, Jake's older sister, Emily, turned to me. "So, how do you manage your finances? Being a lawyer, you must be earning a lot." I hesitated for a moment before answering. "I try to save and invest wisely. It's important to have a financial safety net." Jake jumped in. "She's the practical one in our relationship." Emily laughed. "Sounds like you two balance each other out." The evening went on, and I could feel the difference in our lifestyles. While I was always cautious about spending, Jake's family seemed to have a live for today mentality. It was clear that they enjoyed the finer things in life and didn't hesitate to indulge. As the night drew to a close, Linda pulled me aside. "You know, dear," she began, "Jake is lucky to have you, but do let him have his fun. Money is meant to be enjoyed." I nodded politely. "Of course. I just believe in being careful." She patted my hand. "Balance is key." As Jake and I drove back home, the weight of our differences hung in the air. I turned to him. "Your family is lovely, but we have very different views on money." Jake sighed. "I know, but love is about compromise, right?" I smiled. "Yes, but compromise doesn't mean losing oneself." Jake reached over and squeezed my hand. "We'll figure it out." But deep down, I couldn't shake off the feeling that our financial differences, combined with the influence of Jake's family, would soon lead to challenges that neither of us were prepared for. And so it happened. We were barely through the front door when the tension in Jake's family home became apparent. The large living room, which I remembered as a place of laughter and chatter during our last visit, was now filled with anxious faces. Everyone was there. Jake's parents, his siblings, and most notably, his younger brother Ryan. I had always found Ryan a bit unpredictable. He was the sort of person who took chances, always believing the next big break was just around the corner. That day, he looked restless, his eyes darting around the room, avoiding direct contact. Without much preamble, Linda, Jake's mother, began, "Thank you for coming on such short notice. We have a serious situation on our hands." Ryan, with a sigh, came forward. "I messed up. I owe the bank $100,000. They're saying they'll take legal action if I don't pay soon." The room erupted in a flurry of questions and exclaims. Jake's hand tightened around mine. He looked more shocked than anyone. Mark, Jake's father, rubbed his temples. "Ryan, we always warned you about getting involved in those sketchy deals." Ryan snapped back. "I thought they were good investments." Seeing where the discussion might be heading, Linda tried to refocus the group. "The blame game won't help. We need to find a solution." Emily, Jake's sister, interjected, "Why don't we all chip in? If we pool our resources, we might cover most of it." Mark sighed. "Most of our money is tied up. We can't pull out that kind of cash right now." Then, all eyes turned to me. I felt trapped, like a deer in headlights. I sensed what was coming next. Jake, squeezing my hand tighter, spoke up. "You've got savings, right? We can use that to help Ryan out." I looked at him in disbelief. Was he seriously suggesting this? Linda's eyes brightened. "Oh, that would be wonderful. Can you help, dear?" I tried to remain calm. "Jake, we've talked about being careful with our finances. My savings are for our future." Jake's face reddened. "This is family. Don't you care about my brother?" Ryan nodded. "Yeah, aren't we supposed to be family now? Or does money matter more to you?" Feeling cornered, I replied, "I understand this is a tough situation, but why should I hand over my hard-earned savings when there might be other solutions? Maybe I can help negotiate with the bank? Work out a plan?" Jake's voice grew louder. "This isn't the time for legal advice. Ryan needs help now." Linda chimed in, with an edge to her voice. "We thought family meant something to you. Guess we were wrong." The room felt stifling, the weight of their expectations and accusations pressing down on me. I had hoped Jake would be my ally, but he seemed to have chosen his family's side. The meeting ended with no resolution. As Jake and I walked back to the car, I felt a chasm growing between us. The dawning light had always been a comforting sight, but this morning its warmth was overshadowed by a chilling discovery. Glancing at my phone, I saw an alarming bank notification. My heart thudded heavily as I saw the staggering amount. $150,000 had been transferred out of my savings, and even more shockingly, it had been sent to Jake's account. Confusion and dread wrapped around me. This couldn't be right. Without hesitation, I tried calling Jake, but he didn't answer. I sent a message. "Jake, why is there $150,000 transferred to your account? We need to talk. Now." Time ticked by, and every silent moment only amplified my anxiety. He didn't respond. The swirling unease forced me into action, and I decided to confront him at his workplace. As I approached his office, I saw his empty desk. One of his colleagues, Sarah, looked up and said, "Looking for Jake? He's taken the day off. Some personal matters," he mentioned. I muttered a thanks, my thoughts racing even faster now. With growing dread, I decided to go to his parents' place. Perhaps they knew something, or perhaps they could get Jake to talk to me. The large wooden door of their house looked more imposing than ever. I knocked assertively. After a brief moment, Linda, Jake's mother, opened the door just a crack. Her guarded expression told me she was aware of something. "I need to speak to Jake," I demanded. Linda glanced behind her, hesitating. "Jake isn't here," she replied. "Where is he? He's taken a huge amount from our joint savings. I need answers." Her face remained passive. "I don't know about any money," she claimed, but her eyes darted away. "Let me in. We need to discuss this," I insisted. But instead of yielding, she firmly stated, "I think it's best if you leave," and shut the door in my face. The blatant act left me stunned. Standing there, I realized the gravity of the betrayal. They knew, and they were covering for him. The reception area of the police station was bustling. Uniformed officers moved to and fro, the hum of conversation punctuated by the ring of phones. I approached the front desk, where an officer sat, looking engrossed in paperwork. "Excuse me," I began, my voice slightly shaky. "I need to report a significant unauthorized transaction from my bank account. It's my husband." The officer, whose name tag read Perez, looked up, her eyes filled with understanding. "Take a seat." She gestured to the chairs nearby. "I'll call someone to assist you." Sitting down, my thoughts swirled. Was I really about to report my own husband? Before I could contemplate further, a tall officer approached me. "Mrs. Collins?" he asked. I nodded. "Yes, that's me." "I'm Officer Daniels. Officer Perez informed me about your situation. Let's go to my office where we can talk." We walked down a corridor, and he gestured to a chair opposite his desk. As I explained the situation to him, I noticed his brows furrow in concern. "So, you believe your husband took this money without your consent?" I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "Yes, and his family seems to be in on it. They shut me out when I went to confront them." Officer Daniels jotted down notes. "Do you have any evidence of this transaction?" I pulled out my phone and showed him the bank notification and the message I had sent Jake, as well as his vague reply. Officer Daniels looked at the screen, his expression serious. This certainly helps, but it's going to be a complicated case, given that he's your husband. Do you wish to press charges? Taking a deep breath, I responded, Yes, I do. I feel betrayed and violated. I need to stand up for myself. He nodded. I understand. We'll start the process. It may take time, but we'll support you every step of the way. Thank you, I whispered, tears threatening to spill. Officer Daniels extended a comforting hand. It's tough, I know, but you're doing the right thing. We'll get to the bottom of this. The courtroom was a daunting place, its high ceilings echoing the whispers of the people inside. Rows of wooden benches filled with friends, family, reporters, and strangers who had taken an interest in the case. The tension was palpable. I sat on one side, dressed conservatively, my best friend Sarah by my side for support. Across the room, Jake sat with his parents. He avoided making eye contact with me. The judge, a stern-looking woman with gray hair tied back neatly, cleared her throat, signaling the start of the proceedings. Order in the court, she declared. The prosecution began by detailing the charges against Jake: the unauthorized transaction, the evasion when confronted, and the role of Jake's family in possibly abetting the crime. It was painful to relive the betrayal as the evidence was presented. Bank statements, my call records, and the security footage from Jake's parents' home on the day I confronted them. Then it was Jake's turn to testify. He stood, looking much smaller than I remembered. Your Honor, I admit to transferring the money, but I did it out of desperation. My family was drowning in debt. I thought if I took the money, it would fix everything. I planned to return it. I clenched my fists. He was playing the victim card. The prosecutor spoke up. Mr. Collins, did you discuss this with your wife before taking such a drastic step? Jake hesitated. No, I thought she wouldn't understand. The prosecutor raised an eyebrow. So, you decided stealing was the better option? Jake lowered his gaze. I made a mistake. The trial went on for hours. Witnesses were called, statements were read. When the time came for me to testify, I felt a lump in my throat. With every ounce of strength, I recounted the events, the betrayal, the pain of being shut out by someone I had once loved. Sarah was called up next. She spoke of my character, my hard work, my dedication to building a life with Jake, and the anguish I had experienced when discovering the betrayal. When the closing statements were made, the room held its collective breath. The judge, after taking her time, declared, Mr. Collins, you've admitted to your crime, and while I understand your intent was not malicious, the act was a clear violation of trust. You will return the full amount of $150,000 to Mrs. Collins immediately and pay an additional fine for this unauthorized transaction. Jake's face went pale. His parents seemed equally shocked. Furthermore, the judge continued, I advise both parties to consider mediation to resolve any personal disputes. As I left the courtroom, I felt a mixture of relief and sadness. Justice had been served, but at what cost? The man I had once dreamt of building a life with was now a stranger, a criminal in my eyes. After the court proceedings, my mind kept going back to one thing. How did Jake's family end up in such a mess in the first place? And why was I, a mere bystander in their family affairs, paying the price? My curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to find out the root cause. The first person I thought to reach out to was Amanda, Jake's ex-girlfriend from before we met. She had once mentioned how Jake's family had a penchant for shady dealings. Back then, I had dismissed her words as jealousy, but now I wondered if there was some truth to it. I dialed her number, half expecting her not to pick up, but she did. Hello? Hey, Amanda, it's Rachel. I know it's been a while, but I wanted to talk. She paused, then replied, About Jake? Yes. We met up at a quiet coffee shop the next day. Amanda looked different, more mature and composed than I remembered. After exchanging pleasantries, I got straight to the point. Amanda, you once told me about Jake's family, about their dealings. I need to know more. She sighed, taking a sip of her coffee. I wondered when you'd ask. Jake's family has been involved in some sketchy businesses for years. Loan sharking, shady investments, you name it. They've always been about quick money. I frowned, but Jake never seemed that way. At least, not when we were dating. Amanda shook her head. He tried to distance himself from it, but family ties run deep. And when his brother got into that massive debt, he got sucked right back in. My heart sank. So, all this time? She nodded. He's been trying to bail them out. I warned you, remember? I saw the signs, the desperation, the sneaky phone calls, but you were too in love to see. I stared down, fighting back tears. I can't believe I was so naive. She reached across the table, squeezing my hand. You're not the first and won't be the last. They're masters of manipulation. The conversation shifted, and I learned that Jake's brother had a gambling problem. The debts weren't from a failed business or medical emergency. They were from nights spent at underground gambling dens and high-stakes poker games. I thanked Amanda for her honesty and clarity. As I walked back to my car, everything made sense. The secrecy, the desperation, the betrayal. Jake's family was drowning, and in their desperation, they tried to drag me down with them. After the dust settled, one thing was clear to me. I needed to put the past firmly behind me. The first step was finalizing the divorce from Jake. It was a relatively quick process, given the circumstances. My lawyer, an old friend from law school, ensured that it went smoothly without me having to face Jake again. One evening, after a long day at work, I met up with some college friends for dinner. Sarah, always the one with the latest gossip, leaned in, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. You remember Jake's brother, right? Heard he's been locked up for fraud. I raised an eyebrow. You're kidding. She shook her head. Wish I was. Multiple counts of fraud and embezzlement. They say he'd been scamming people for years. Anna chimed in. And that's not all. Jake's parents' property? Seized and auctioned off to clear their mounting debts. I took a deep breath, processing the information. It's just sad. That family had so many issues, so many problems. Sarah squeezed my hand. You dodged a bullet, girl, and look at you now, moving on, living your best life. I smiled, grateful for the support. Thanks, Sarah. It's been a journey, but I'm finding my way. Life continued. Days turned into weeks, and then months. The wounds of the past slowly began to heal, and I started building a life that was truly mine. One evening, as I was settling down with a book, my phone rang. An unfamiliar number flashed on the screen. I answered cautiously. Hello? Hey, it's Jake, came the hesitant voice. A chill ran down my spine. What do you want? He cleared his throat. Look, I know I've done wrong. I'm in a tough spot right now, financially. I was wondering if... No. I cut him off sharply. But I just need a little help to... No, Jake. You and your family have taken enough from me. I owe you nothing. I replied, my voice cold and firm. There was silence on the other end. Then, a soft, defeated, all right. I ended the call, feeling a mixture of anger and pity. But mostly, I felt relief. Relief that I had moved on, that I was no longer entangled in their web of deceit and drama. Over time, I immersed myself in work and spent quality time with friends and family who genuinely cared about me. I learned to value and trust myself more than ever, firmly believing that no matter what life threw my way, I would always come out stronger on the other side.
I remember the day Lily was born like it was yesterday. I was 8, a skinny girl with wide eyes and a head full of dreams. My parents, John and Sarah, were ordinary folks. Dad worked at a local factory, and Mom stayed at home. Life was simple until Lily came along. Look at her, Sarah. She's got your eyes, Dad had cooed, holding Lily for the first time. Mom had smiled, a tired but triumphant smile. And your nose, John. I stood by the door, clutching my ragged doll, waiting for someone to notice me. Can I see Lily? I asked timidly. Mom glanced at me, her eyes barely registering my presence. Not now, Linda. Lily needs rest, and so do I. School wasn't much better. Kids can be cruel when they smell vulnerability. Hey, Scarecrow Linda, Jack, the class bully, would sneer as he tugged at my faded dress. Did you get your clothes from the trash? I tried to ignore them, but words hurt more than punches. At home, Lily grew into a pampered princess. She'd scribble in my textbooks and giggle. "Look, Linda, I'm helping you with homework." I'd sigh. "Lily, please don't do that. I need those for school." One day, she went too far, pouring paint over my only good dress. I yelled at her, but she just cried. That's when Mom stormed in. "What's going on here?" she demanded, her eyes flashing. "Lily ruined my dress," I said, holding up the stained fabric. Mom didn't even look at the dress. "How dare you yell at your sister? Go to your room, Linda. No dessert for a week." Grandma was the only one who understood. "Don't let them get you down, Linda," she'd say. Her house was my refuge, filled with books and love. She taught me to escape into stories, to live 1,000 lives within those worn pages. The day Grandma passed away was the day I lost my true home. I remember coming back from school, my heart heavy, walking into a house filled with her absence. My parents were in the living room, already talking about her belongings. "We should start clearing out her stuff," Dad said, his voice devoid of any sadness. Mom was looking through a list. "And her library? Those dusty old books?" I lingered at the doorway, listening, a tightness growing in my chest. "Just get rid of them," Dad shrugged. "Who needs all that old paper?" I couldn't hold back anymore. "Can I have Grandma's books?" I blurted out, stepping into the room. "Please?" They both turned, almost surprised to see me. "Sure, take them," Mom said dismissively. "We don't have any use for them anyway." I spent the next days transferring Grandma's books to my room, each one a piece of her I wasn't ready to lose. Life moved on in its cruel pace. As high school came to an end, my parents made an offer I didn't expect. "We'll pay for your college," Mom announced one evening. "You can study accounting or something practical." I remember feeling a mix of surprise and suspicion. "Really? Why?" I asked. "It's our duty," Dad said. "Just don't expect any more handouts after this." College was my escape, a chance to be more than just the overlooked sister. But even that came with its price. A few weeks into my part-time job at the library, Mom cornered me. "You're making money now. It's only fair you start paying us back for your tuition." I was stunned. "But you said you'd pay for my college." "I didn't ask for this." "Don't be ungrateful," she snapped. "Half your salary, that's the deal." The injustice of it burned in me, but I had no choice. Half of what little I earned went straight into their pockets. Years passed in this exhausting cycle: work, study, pay my unfair dues. My graduation was supposed to be a celebration, but it felt more like a reminder of the shackles I couldn't escape. At the dinner table, with Lily smirking beside me, my parents dropped another bombshell. "Now that you're working full-time, we expect you to continue paying us," Dad said, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. "What?" I was incredulous. "But I've been paying you all through college." "When does this end?" "It ends when we say it does," Mom said coldly. "You owe us, Linda." I felt a mixture of anger and helplessness. "This isn't fair," I protested. "Life isn't fair," Dad retorted. "You live under our roof. You follow our rules." And just like that, my dreams of independence, of a life where I could be my own person, were crushed under the weight of their greed and entitlement. In my room that night, surrounded by Grandma's books, I realized the stark contrast between the warmth and love they represented and the cold, calculating nature of my own family. These books were my only legacy, the only thing that connected me to a sense of belonging, of being understood. Life after college became a monotonous cycle of work and fatigue. Every payday, the same scene would unfold at home. "Linda, have you got your paycheck yet?" Mom would ask, her hand already outstretched, the moment I stepped through the door. I'd hand over half of my earnings without a word. It had become a routine, a bitter pill I swallowed each month. One evening, I mustered the courage to confront them. "Mom, Dad, I've been thinking," I began hesitantly. "Maybe I can start keeping a bit more of my salary. I need to save up, maybe for a place of my own." Mom's expression hardened. "Your own place? Don't be ridiculous. You owe us, Linda. We paid for your education." "But I've been paying back. Isn't that enough?" I protested, feeling a surge of frustration. "Enough? You think a few $1,000s cover your debt to us?" Dad's voice rose. "We raised you, fed you, clothed you. You owe us for a lifetime." I felt my heart sink. But I never asked for any of this. I just wanted to go to college. "And who do you think paid for that? You think that was free?" Mom snapped. "No, Linda, you'll continue paying us, just as you have been." The unfairness of it all was suffocating. I had hoped, foolishly, that they might see reason, but their entitlement knew no bounds. Lily, ever the favored child, never missed a chance to taunt me. "Look at our little accountant, can't even afford a new dress," she'd sneer, flaunting the latest gadget or outfit they'd bought her. I remember one particularly hard day at work. I had stayed late, trying to finish a complex report. Exhausted, I reached home to find my family had ordered takeout, my favorite Thai food. For a moment, my spirits lifted. "Is there any left for me?" I asked, hopeful. Mom shrugged. "You should have been here earlier. Besides, you can buy your own food with your big salary." I retreated to my room, too tired to argue. Dinner that night was a stale sandwich and a cup of tea. Alone in my room, surrounded by the comforting presence of my grandmother's books, I felt the full weight of the life I was trapped in. I longed for more, for freedom, for a chance to live for myself. But every attempt to break free was met with guilt trips and reminders of a debt that I was beginning to realize might not even be mine. My life at home had become a ceaseless routine of work and servitude. Each day, I'd return from my job as an accountant, mentally drained, only to be greeted by the chaos of my family's demands. One evening, I came home to find the living room in a mess. Dad was lounging on the sofa, watching TV, while Lily was sprawled on the floor, surrounded by a pile of clothes. "Linda, you're back." Finally, Dad said without looking away from the screen. "Clean up this mess, will you? And start dinner, we're hungry." "But I've just got back from work," I protested weakly, my shoulders slumping. "Work? You call sitting in an office all day work?" Lily scoffed, not bothering to lift her gaze from her phone. "Try doing something useful for a change." Their words stung, but I was too tired to argue. Silently, I began picking up the clothes, my mind heavy with resentment. As I cooked dinner, the familiar sense of injustice gnawed at me. I was more than just their housekeeper, more than their source of income. But in their eyes, I was nothing more than an extension of their will, a means to an end. The next morning, I was met with another list of demands. "Linda, take Lily shopping today. She needs new clothes," Mom instructed as I was about to leave for work. "But I have a busy day at the office," I said, my voice strained with frustration. "Oh, what's more important? Your job or your family?" Mom retorted, her tone sharp. The irony of her words wasn't lost on me. My job was important only when it benefited them. Reluctantly, I agreed to take Lily shopping after work, sacrificing the little personal time I had left. At the mall, Lily flitted from store to store, her excitement in stark contrast to my growing despair. "Isn't this dress cute, Linda?" she gushed, holding up an expensive designer dress. "Buy it for me. You owe us, after all." I looked at the price tag and felt a pang in my chest. "Lily, this is too much. I can't afford this." "Can't afford it? But you're the big earner in the family, she taunted, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Stop being so stingy. I bought the dress, my heart heavy with the knowledge that this was just another link in the chain that bound me to them. That night, as I lay in bed, I realized that my life had become a cycle of giving my time, my money, my energy, with nothing in return. I was trapped in a life of servitude, catering to the whims of a family that saw me as nothing more than a resource to be exploited. The day of my 30th birthday dawned just like any other day. I woke up early, hoping maybe, just maybe, this day would be different. That my family would remember and we'd have a small celebration, a moment of happiness. I walked into the kitchen where Mom, Dad, and Lily were already having breakfast. Good morning, I said softly. Dad glanced up. Morning. Make sure you're not late for work. I waited, hoping for more, but there was just silence. My heart sank. They had forgotten. It was just another day for them. I tried to hide my disappointment as I prepared my breakfast. The clock ticked away, each second a reminder of how little they cared. As I was about to leave for work, I mustered up the courage to remind them. You know, today is my birthday, I said, my voice barely a whisper. Mom looked up, a flicker of surprise crossing her face before it vanished. Oh, is it? Well, happy birthday. Don't expect us to throw a party. Lily snickered. Yeah, happy birthday, Linda. Maybe you can treat yourself to something nice with your big paycheck. Their words stung like 1,000 needles. I left the house, holding back tears, feeling more alone than ever. The day at work was long and tiring. When I returned home, I hoped maybe they'd have a change of heart. But the house was just as I'd left it. I found Mom, Dad, and Lily in the living room, ordering food from a fancy restaurant over the phone. My hopes dissipated like mist. Are we expecting guests? I asked, a glimmer of hope reigniting. No, just felt like ordering something nice, Mom said casually. You can join us if you want. I watched as they ordered dish after dish, my heart sinking with each click of the phone. Should I get the lobster or the steak? Lily mused aloud. You should get both, Mom encouraged. I stood there, a bystander in my own home. They hadn't just forgotten my birthday, they didn't care. I retreated to my room, the walls echoing with their laughter and chatter. I sat on my bed, surrounded by Grandma's books, the only gifts I'd ever truly treasured. In the silence of my room, I called my Aunt Mary, the only other person who had ever shown me kindness. She answered with a warm, "Happy birthday, Linda. How are you, dear?" Her words, so simple yet so full of warmth, brought tears to my eyes. We talked for a while, and she shared stories about Grandma, bringing a smile to my face. Then she said something that stopped me cold. You know, your grandmother would be so proud of you. She always wanted the best for you. That's why she left the money for your education. I was confused. What money, Aunt Mary? The money she saved up for your college. Didn't your parents tell you? She was so determined to give you a good start in life. My world spun. Grandma had paid for my college? All these years, my parents had lied, making me believe I owed them. I hung up the phone, my mind racing. The truth was a key, unlocking the chains I'd been bound with for so long. My parents had manipulated me, used me, all based on a lie. That night, I couldn't sleep. The revelation churned in my mind, a mix of anger, betrayal, and a newfound sense of determination. I couldn't let them control me anymore. I had to break free, to find my own path. The next morning, I confronted them. I know about the money Grandma left for my education. Why did you lie to me? Their reactions were a mix of shock and defensiveness. We did what we had to do, Mom said coldly. We're your parents. It's your duty to support us. Duty? You lied and made me your servant. I exclaimed, my voice trembling with emotion. Dad just rolled her eyes. Drama queen. You should be grateful we let you live here. That was the final straw. I was done being their scapegoat, their cash cow. It was time for me to take control of my life. The morning after my birthday was a new beginning. The sun seemed brighter, the air fresher, as if the world was acknowledging my resolve. I had packed my things quietly, trying to avoid any early confrontations. But as I was about to leave, Mom and Lily confronted me in the hallway, blocking my path. Where do you think you're going with those bags? Mom asked, her eyes narrowing. I'm leaving, I stated, my voice steady despite the pounding of my heart. Mom's tone turned pleading. Linda, you can't do this to us. We're your family. Where will you go? Anywhere but here, I said, stepping around them. I deserve better than this. I deserve a life. As I walked out the door, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The shackles of guilt and obligation that had held me down for so long were finally broken. I didn't look back. I walked towards the bus stop, my heart filled with a mix of fear and excitement. I was stepping into the unknown, but for the first time, it was a path that I had chosen for myself. On the bus, I called a number I had written down a few months back, an advertisement for an apartment rental. The voice on the other end was friendly and understanding. By the time the bus reached my stop, I had arranged to view the apartment later that day. The apartment was small, but cozy, a stark contrast to the coldness of my family home. As I signed the lease, I felt a sense of ownership and independence I had never experienced before. That night, in my new apartment, surrounded by my grandmother's books, I finally felt at peace. I cooked a simple dinner for myself, enjoying every bite without the weight of judgment or expectation. My phone rang several times that evening, the caller ID showing my family's number. But I didn't answer. I was done letting them control my life. Instead, I curled up on the small sofa with a book, losing myself in a story of adventure and courage. It was like Grandma was there with me, her spirit encouraging me to live the life I was meant to have. In the quiet of my apartment, I made a promise to myself. I would live my life on my own terms, find my own happiness. I would no longer be the overlooked child, but a woman strong, free, and in control of her destiny. Settling into my new apartment was like starting a fresh chapter in my life. I had my own space, and for the first time, I could use my salary for myself. It was a revelation to realize how far my earnings could stretch when I wasn't giving half of it away to my parents and sister. I could afford good food, stylish clothes, and even indulge in a bit of self-care. One of my first acts of independence was giving myself a complete makeover. I got a stylish haircut, something I had always wanted but never dared to do. I bought clothes that made me feel confident and happy. Every morning, I dressed for work with a sense of pride and excitement. At work, my colleagues noticed the change immediately. Linda, you look fantastic. What's your secret? Sarah, one of my closest colleagues, asked me one day. Just enjoying my life and embracing the change, I replied with a smile, feeling a sense of accomplishment. But the most important thing I did after moving out was to take my grandmother's books with me. Those books were more than just literature, they were a connection to the happiest part of my childhood and a reminder of my grandmother's love. Every evening, after returning from work, I would make myself a cup of tea and curl up with a book from Grandma's collection. It was my way of keeping her memory alive and cherishing the love for reading she had instilled in me. Life in my new apartment was peaceful and fulfilling. I relished in the small joys, like cooking my favorite meals, decorating my space, and losing myself in a good book. The sense of freedom was exhilarating. One afternoon, as I was arranging my books on a new shelf, I came across an old photo of my grandmother tucked inside a novel. Tears welled up in my eyes as I held it. I knew she would have been proud of me for finding my own way. I placed the photo on my nightstand, a nightly reminder of where I came from and the strength I carried within me. My grandmother's enduring love and the lessons she taught me were my guiding light. As days turned into weeks, I found myself evolving. I was no longer the overlooked, burdened daughter and sister. I was Linda, an independent woman who had taken control of her life. I had a job that I enjoyed, a cozy home filled with memories, and the freedom to be myself. Life was no longer about surviving, it was about living, thriving, and finding joy in the little things. My transformation was not just external, it was a deep, internal change that had reshaped my view of the world and myself. Every morning, as I looked at myself in the mirror, I saw a confident, happy woman staring back at me. I was finally at peace, living a life that was truly my own. I had been living in my new apartment for a month when my phone rang one evening. The caller ID flashed my parents' number, a sight that now stirred a mix of emotions. Bracing myself, I answered. "Linda, this is ridiculous. You need to come back home. We can't manage without the money you were giving us." Mom's voice was both pleading and demanding. "I'm sorry you're finding things tough, but I've moved on. Maybe it's time you both looked for jobs," I suggested, trying to keep my voice calm. "How dare you talk to us like that? After all we've done for you?" My dad's voice boomed through the speaker. "I've done my part for years. It's time for you to take responsibility for your own lives," I replied firmly. Their response was a barrage of insults and accusations, but I held my ground. "I'm not responsible for your financial problems," I repeated before ending the call. A few days later, there was a knock at my door. Opening it, I found my sister Lily standing there, her expression one of expectancy. "Linda, I need money for a new gadget. Just transfer it to me like before," she said, as if nothing had changed. I couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity. "Lily, I'm not your personal bank anymore. You should try earning your own money." Her reaction was immediate and intense. She began screaming at me, hurling insults and accusations. "You owe us. You're just a selfish, heartless monster." Her screams were so loud that they attracted the attention of my neighbors. Concerned, one of them called the police. Soon, 2 officers were at my door, questioning us about the commotion. After explaining the situation, the officers escorted Lily out, who continued her tirade even as she was led away. I blocked my family's numbers on my phone after that. I was done being their scapegoat and ATM. The next few weeks brought whispers of my family's worsening situation. Mutual acquaintances shared stories of their mounting debts and desperate attempts to find money. My parents, who had never worked a day since I started earning, were now doing odd jobs. Lily, too, found herself in a situation she had never imagined. The sister who once mocked me for my old clothes was now selling her designer outfits and expensive gadgets just to make ends meet. Despite a fleeting sense of pity, I reminded myself of their years of neglect and exploitation. They had chosen this path, and it was their responsibility to navigate it. In my world, life was blossoming. My job was going well, and I was enjoying my newfound freedom and independence. My apartment, once a distant dream, was now my haven of peace, filled with memories of my grandmother and her books. One evening, as I sat in my reading nook, a sense of profound contentment washed over me. The once overlooked and undervalued daughter had transformed into an independent woman. I had broken free from the chains of familial manipulation and emerged stronger.